Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Vincent Brothers. Vincent Brothers was born on May 30th, 1962, in Long Island, New York. From a young age, he was known for his charisma, reliability, and diligence. He also served in the Marine Corps Reserves. After graduating from Norfolk State University, Vincent moved to California in the mid-1980s to pursue further education and eventually earned a master's degree. Despite having a successful career as a school administrator, Vincent's personal life was marred by tumultuous relationships. His two previous marriages ended in divorce. In 1988, while working at California State University in Bakersfield, Vincent had a daughter with his girlfriend. He took his girlfriend to court to establish paternity and was eventually awarded custody and visitation rights. Initially required to pay $350 per month in child support, this amount was increased to $771 in 2003. That same year, Vincent was convicted of wife abuse and received a 6-day jail sentence and probation. In 1992, Vincent married for the second time, but this marriage also ended in divorce in 1996 due to accusations of intimidation and physical abuse by his second wife. While serving as the assistant principal at Emerson High School, Vincent was accused of sexually harassing a colleague. The woman claimed that Vincent assaulted her at his home and took her phone to prevent her from calling the police. When she tried to report the incident to the police, she said police discouraged her from pursuing charges because she was afraid of Vincent's reputation. The harassment continued at school, with Vincent allegedly touching her inappropriately. The woman eventually resigned from her job as a teacher, citing an unfriendly work environment. The school district investigated Vincent due to his increasingly threatening behavior and threatening phone calls. Despite Vincent denying the allegations and having no disciplinary record, the school district transferred him to another school as a precaution. Vincent then began working at John C. Fremont Elementary School in Bakersfield, California, where he also became famous and respected. Vincent was especially known for ensuring the safety of students by taking them home after school. While teaching at Fremont Elementary School, Vincent met Joanie Harper, the school's security supervisor and basketball manager. Vincent and Joanie began dating and eventually married after the birth of their first child, Marcus. Their family grew with the arrival of their second child, Lindsay, in 2000. However, Vincent's infidelity caused him and Joanie to divorce in September 2001. 2 years later, Vincent and Joanie remarried in secret, and their third child, Marshall, was born 4 months later. Joanie eventually opened up to her friends about the problems in her marriage. Unlike before, she expressed her fear that Vincent might harm her. However, to those around them, Vincent's family appeared happy and actively involved in the community, often attending local events and maintaining good relationships with others. From the outside, Joanie and Vincent's marriage seemed stable. Joanie continued to work as a basketball manager, pursuing her passion. However, no one expected that the tragic events hidden behind the family's happy exterior would soon emerge. 3 months before the tragic event, Vincent had moved out of the house due to frequent arguments with his mother-in-law, Ernestine. On July 6, 2003, Joanie attended a church service with her 3 children, Marcus, Lindsay, and 6-week-old Marshall, as well as her mother, Ernestine. The family had lunch at Black Angus after the ceremony, then returned home for a nap. As was their custom, Joanie and the children stayed in one bedroom, while Ernestine stayed in another room in the house. Tragically, the family was attacked in their home. The killer easily entered the house without signs of forced entry and shot Joanie twice in the head while she was in the bedroom. Lindsay was also shot in the back. The noise alerted Ernestine, causing her to quickly arm herself with a .38 revolver and move toward the hallway to investigate. Unfortunately, she was killed before she could defend herself. The attacker shot Ernestine twice in the face, causing her to collapse in the hallway outside her bedroom. The attacker then entered the room and shot Marcus, followed by a fatal shot to the baby's back. Each shot was aimed very carefully. Instead of fleeing the scene immediately, the attacker went to the kitchen to get a knife and then returned to the bedroom. There, the attacker stabbed the victims multiple times in the back. On July 8, 2003, Kelsey Spann, Joanie's best friend, became worried when she had not heard from Joanie, Ernestine, and Joanie's children since they went to church the previous Sunday. Kelsey decided to go to Joanie's house to check on them using the key Joanie had given her. When she tried to unlock the door, she found it difficult to open due to an obstacle. She then went to the back of the house and found an unlocked sliding glass door, which was unusual. Upon entering the house, Kelsey discovered Joanie, her mother Ernestine, and Marcus, Lindsay, and Marshall, all dead. Kelsey immediately contacted authorities at 7 a.m. They arrived at the scene and discovered 5 family members brutally murdered. The family's peaceful home, located in a quiet neighborhood, became the scene of a horrific crime. The police investigation concluded that the family had been tragically killed on Sunday afternoon as they returned from church. Before leaving the scene, the perpetrator covered the bodies in the bedroom with blankets and pillows taken from other rooms. Detectives identified Joanie as the primary target due to the severity of her injuries, suggesting the attacker had been extremely angry. Police were concerned about Vincent's safety and discovered he had been in Ohio. Detective Watts traveled to North Carolina, where Vincent was visiting his mother with his brother Melvin. When North Carolina police met with Vincent, they found him severely traumatized and unable to speak coherently, which did not provide many details about the investigation. Vincent's behavior was inconsistent with that of a murderer, and because he had been on the other side of the country when the murder occurred, police initially ruled him out as a suspect. He also provided receipts showing purchases made around the time of the tragedy, confirming that he had not been in Bakersfield, California, where the incident occurred. However, Detective Watts still doubted Vincent's innocence. Notably, Vincent never asked how his wife and children had died, which aroused suspicion. On July 11, 2003, Vincent had returned to Los Angeles without attending their family's memorial service, but Vincent had attended their funeral 5 days later. As the investigation continued, it was discovered that Vincent had moved out of his family home in April 2003. Additionally, his wife, Joanie, had been planning to divorce him again and had sought child support. Authorities also discovered that Vincent had had a history of violence against women, which had led them to take a closer look at his alibi. Upon further investigation, surveillance video from the store's checkout counters had shown that Melvin, not Vincent, had made the purchase at that time. When confronted, Melvin revealed that Vincent had told him to make these purchases in Vincent's name. Despite their efforts, police were unable to find any witnesses who had seen Vincent between the evening of July 4th and the evening of July 7th. Both Melvin and his family insisted they had not seen Vincent during this time. Although there was no direct evidence linking Vincent to the murder, police discovered he had some suspicious activities. Vincent had rented a car when he had arrived in Columbus, Ohio, and he had stayed at his brother's house. Police suspected Vincent had flown to Columbus on July 2, 2003 to visit family, then returned to Bakersfield on July 4, where the tragic incident had occurred on July 6. He was supposed to return to Ohio on July 7 and had arrived late that evening. Law enforcement had conducted a thorough inspection of the Dodge vehicle, paying special attention to its radiator and air filter. To help identify insects found in the car, investigators had enlisted the expertise of Dr. Lynn Kimsey from the Bohart Museum of Entomology at the University of California, Davis. Dr. Kimsey carefully had analyzed the insects and identified more than 100 species, including several species found only in the western region beyond the Rocky Mountains. The presence of some insects suggested that Vincent had moved at night. By carefully analyzing the insects, Dr. Kimsey had been able to plot a path that showed the car had traveled west from Ohio. Investigators later had tracked down the 5 previous car renters and confirmed that none of them had driven the car to California or near the Rocky Mountains. Police also had examined photographic evidence and found the end of a rubber glove in the laundry room. DNA testing showed a match. It belonged to none other than Vincent Brothers. Detective Watts had discovered that Vincent had been planning to leave town and had begun selling his assets, including putting his house on the market. As a result, Vincent had been arrested on April 30, 2004 and charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. The trial began in 2007, with prosecutor Lisa Green leading the case. The prosecution argued that Vincent's motive for the murder had been financial, suggesting he had acted out of fear of having to pay child support due to his impending divorce from Joanie. The prosecution portrayed Vincent as a serial adulterer who often had disappeared for long periods of time and who could become violent. To support their case, the prosecution called several witnesses, including Dr. Lynn Kimsey, who testified that the insects found in the Dodge were consistent with insects commonly found along Interstate 70. This testimony was further supported by evidence showing 5,424 miles had been driven from July 2 to July 11 in accordance with the prosecution's statement. However, when Melvin had appeared in court, he tried to change his previous testimony, claiming that he had lied to the police about Vincent giving him a credit card to use. In response, the defense presented an expert on high-speed driving, who argued that maintaining an average speed of 70 miles per hour during the trip from Ohio to California had been extremely difficult. The defense also presented its pathologists, who testified that the murders could have occurred as late as Monday morning, July 7, 2003. The defense also had presented interrogation tapes to prove that Melvin had been pressured by police to change his statement. Additionally, they called a witness who claimed to have seen a car accident involving Vincent on Sunday morning, in which a boy on a bicycle had collided with Vincent's rental car at an intersection. Although the incident had not been reported to the police due to the lack of damage or injuries, the prosecution attempted to verify the story. Vincent had taken it upon himself to defend himself. He had strongly denied all accusations about his married life and had firmly denied the accusation of murdering his family. Throughout his testimony, Vincent had become emotional and had shed tears several times. The prosecution had called Carla Tuya, principal of Franklin School, as a witness. She had testified about her past relationship with Vincent, which had begun in 1996 when his son was born and had ended in 2002 when she had decided to end it. Carla revealed a shocking secret that she and Vincent had been intimate just weeks before the family tragedy, directly contradicting Vincent's previous denials about everything. This admission had damaged Vincent's claim to fidelity to his family. The prosecution had argued that the crime had been carefully planned in advance. Thanks to knowing the family's Sunday habits, the murderer had gained an advantage and had had the opportunity to strike. The perpetrator had taken advantage of this and had waited until the whole family was asleep, then had used the spare key to enter the house through the sliding glass door and had killed each family member. On May 15, 2017, Vincent had been found guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder, making him eligible for the death penalty. The jury had reached this decision after hearing testimony from 137 witnesses and deliberating for nearly 2 days. After the verdict, Vincent had been removed from the courtroom and had been returned to the Luro detention facility under tight security. Then, on September 27, 2007, Dirk County Superior Court Judge Michael Bush had sentenced Vincent Brothers to death by lethal injection. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Fusako Sano. Nobuyuki was born on July 15, 1962, in the Japanese prefecture of Niigata. He grew up in a wealthy family. His family's business, related to passenger transportation, was very successful, thanks to his 62-year-old father. Nobuyuki was a late child, with 5 half-siblings from his father's previous marriage. However, he is not really close to them. As a result, he grew up to be a spoiled and demanding child who always expected to get his own way, immediately. Nobuyuki often becomes aggressive when his expectations are not met in a timely manner. One notable incident occurred. He threw a tantrum in a store, punching his mother when she refused to buy him another toy. Nobuyuki struggled to form relationships with his peers due to his complicated and sometimes unusual behavior. He was also self-conscious about his height, which often caused him to hunch over. This behavior caused his classmates to tease him and give him unflattering nicknames. Despite this, Nobuyuki's family resided in a luxurious 2-story European-style house, which featured a spacious room specifically designed for him. The boy was uncomfortable in the room, fidgeting and expressing fear of being alone. This behavior led his parents to take him to see a doctor. After an initial review, he was referred to a psychiatrist who diagnosed him with multiple disorders, a fear of the dark, a fear of germs and dirt, and a unique of autophobia, fear of loneliness, sociophobia, anxiety related to social interactions. Essentially, he feared both being alone and being around others. As a result, he became a loner in high school, never forming close relationships with classmates, and never having a girlfriend despite his attractive appearance. His peers avoided him, and he became an outcast. The only people he felt comfortable expressing his anger and frustration to were his elderly parents, who forgave him and tried to calm him down with gifts and money. As an adult, he struggled to hold down a job. He frequently got into conflicts with colleagues, neglected his responsibilities, and would often leave work in the middle of the day for no good reason, such as when it was raining and he felt sad. On one occasion, he intentionally hurt a female coworker, likely trying to get her attention out of sympathy. Although the incident was attributed to an accident, he was fired immediately. After being fired, Nobuyuki became unemployed and relied on his parents' financial support. Over time, he became increasingly reclusive, rarely leaving his room, and frequently clashed with his parents. Following a particularly intense quarrel, Nobuyuki started a fire in his home, nearly destroying the house and putting its occupants in harm's way. Nobuyuki was later admitted to a psychiatric clinic for treatment, where he was diagnosed with a depressive disorder, uncontrollable outbursts of aggression, and signs of misogyny, extreme dislike and hatred of women. After a little over a month of treatment, he was discharged, deemed not to pose an immediate threat to others. For a brief period, Nobuyuki remained calm and even began rebuilding the partially burned house, adding a couple of new rooms. However, his efforts were short-lived, and he eventually abandoned the construction project. Nobuyuki became increasingly withdrawn and isolated. He spent most of his time in his room, watching TV. He not only forbade his parents from entering his room, but also the second floor of the house. If they tried to cross this boundary, he would violently lash out at them, punching and threatening to kill them. In the spring of 1989, Nobuyuki began taking walks, but he preferred to stroll near a local school where he could secretly watch the female students. At first, he kept his distance and tried not to communicate with anyone. However, one day, he suddenly grabbed a young girl, who was only 9 years old, and threw her over his shoulder as she was leaving the school gate. He then ran to his car, which was parked nearby. The other children immediately screamed for help, and a school security guard and bystanders quickly intervened, rescuing she and detaining Nobuyuki until the police arrived. Nobuyuki was unable to explain why he attacked she, and it was clear that he had intended to commit a violent and unlawful act against a minor. As a result, he was charged with attempting to commit a violent crime against a child. Nobuyuki Sato avoided a long prison sentence thanks to his father's connections and wealth. In August, Nobuyuki was given a year's probation despite his heinous crime. Shortly thereafter, his name was mysteriously removed from the criminal prosecution database, allegedly due to his father's intervention. However, Nobuyuki's father died shortly after his son's case, dying of a heart attack. Nobuyuki was left with overwhelming shame and guilt for his father's sacrifices and efforts to cover up his crime. After the failure of his first kidnapping attempt, Nobuyuki, 28 years old, tried again a year and a half later. This time, he carefully planned the crime and remained under the police radar for an extended period. On November 13, 1990, Nobuyuki set out on a hunting trip around the city. In the evening, as darkness fell, he spotted 9-year-old Fusako Sano, who had stayed late after school due to a sports event, walking alone on a deserted road. Nobuyuki quickly pulled over in front of her, got out of the car with a knife, and grabbed Fusako. He threatened to slit her throat if she tried to scream or run away. Then, he forced her into the trunk of the car. After driving for a while, he turned into a vacant lot, where he tied Fusako's hands and feet and covered her mouth with tape. When night fell, Nobuyuki drove to his house and took Fusako out of the trunk. Nobuyuki led her through a part of the house that was still under construction to his room, trying not to be seen. He then left the room and re-entered through the front door, as if everything was normal. Once upstairs, Nobuyuki again threatened Fusako with the knife, ordering her to be quiet. He tied her to the bed and warned her that if she tried to leave the room, look out the window, scream, or cry, he would kill her and dispose of her body in the ocean, where no one would ever find it. Fusako was terrified and obeyed the kidnapper's orders, hoping that he would eventually take pity on her and let her go. When Fusako didn't return home from school, her parents started to worry. They knew she had stayed late to watch a baseball game, but as the sun began to set, they expected her to be home by then. Initially, Fusako's parents tried to find their daughter on their own, retracing her usual route from school to home, but their efforts were unsuccessful. As night drew closer, the parents of Fusako turned to the police for help, hoping for a quick resolution. Since Fusako's disappearance, only a few hours had passed, and they were anxious to find her. The police launched a search operation. And by the next morning, they were joined by dozens of volunteers from the local community. The following day, the search party grew to over 200 people, who combed the area, distributed flyers with Fusako's photo, and interviewed passers-by in search of witnesses. Notably, Nobuyuki lived close to Fusako's school and the police station. He had previously attempted to kidnap Fusako, which had brought him to the attention of the police. However, despite this, Nobuyuki was not considered a suspect in the case, thanks to the efforts of his late father. A large-scale search operation was initiated to locate Fusako Sano, a Japanese schoolgirl who had disappeared. The search lasted for many months, covering numerous locations such as empty buildings, houses, railroad cars, and vacant lots. Investigators also searched suspicious vehicles and combed through interstate highways, but found no clues. As the investigation continued, authorities considered various theories, including the possibility of involvement by North Korean special services. However, despite their efforts, the search was unsuccessful, and Fusako remained missing. Fusako later revealed that she was terrified during her captivity and followed Nobuyuki's instructions in the hope that he would eventually release her. However, her captor, Nobuyuki, had no intention of letting her go. For several months, he kept her bound with tight restraints that impaired her blood flow and caused her to lose sensation in her limbs. If she disobeyed or made a sound, he would punish her with a stun gun, beat her, or threaten her with a knife. Notably, Nobuyuki never assaulted Fusako in a sexual manner during her captivity. Instead, he treated her more like a possession or a pet, using her as a means of companionship and conversation. Nobuyuki kept Fusako captive, feeding her a meager diet of food prepared by his mother. As a result, Fusako became severely malnourished and weakened. He restricted her to her bed, forcing her to use plastic bags as a toilet, which he would then dispose of in an unfinished part of the house. Once a month, he would bathe her in a basin, cut her hair and nails, and dress her in his own worn-out clothes. Despite her compliance, Nobuyuki would regularly beat her for his own amusement. Over time, Fusako's spirit was broken, and she became submissive, no longer attempting to escape or even look out the window. As the years passed, Nobuyuki stopped bothering to physically restrain Fusako and didn't even think to lock the door when he stepped out. He would simply cover her with blankets or towels. Occasionally, he would turn on the radio or watch TV with her, but only to programs that interested him, such as Scottish or sports matches. He also brought her comic books, which he enjoyed himself. These were the only things Fusako had to read during her confinement. For nearly a decade, Fusako was isolated, never speaking to anyone else or leaving her room. She remained in bed most of the time, hardly moving or trying to resist her situation. Fusako had become so resigned to her fate that she no longer attempted to escape or call for help. Nobuyuki's mother lived in fear of her son's violence. For years, she had avoided the second-floor room because Nobuyuki had threatened her with violence. This was not an idle warning, as Nobuyuki actually pushed her down the stairs when she tried to enter the room. She retired in 1996 at the age of 73, and her circumstances became extremely difficult. Nobuyuki regularly abused her, forcing her to follow his rules. Desperate for help, she went to the police in the spring of 1996 and filed a report, stating that she was a victim of domestic violence at the hands of her son. However, the police seemed reluctant to intervene and persuaded her to withdraw her statement, advising her to handle the situation on her own. She also sought help from a public health center, complaining about her son's aggressive behavior and requesting that he be hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. Her concerns were ignored, and she was told her son's actions were not worth worrying about. Instead, she was advised to encourage him to seek help voluntarily. In January 2000, the elderly woman, exhausted from years of physical and emotional abuse, made a desperate call for help. She contacted the hospital and the police, requesting that they send the medical team and officers to her home. Her reason for calling was that her son, Nobuyuki, had brutally beaten her again, tied her up, and used a taser on her multiple times. Authorities finally responded to she's pleas for help and arrived at her house. When the ambulance and police car appeared, Nobuyuki became visibly agitated, aggressive, and resistant. He had to be restrained with handcuffs and sedated with a large dose of medication. Nobuyuki's mother confessed to the authorities that she lived in fear of her son, whose behavior had become increasingly aggressive and uncontrollable. She also revealed that she had not been allowed to access the second floor of her home for years, as Nobuyuki had forbidden it, threatening to kill her if she disobeyed. Upon entering the second floor and Nobuyuki's room, the police made a shocking discovery. A pile of blankets on the bed moved slightly, and when the officers peeled them back, they found a thin, pale, and exhausted girl hiding underneath. When questioned, she identified herself and revealed that she had been kidnapped by Nobuyuki while walking home from school a long time ago. After the discovery, the police brought Nobuyuki's mother into the room to ask if she knew the captive girl. However, she was shocked and claimed she had no idea that anyone else lived in the house besides her and her son. The kidnapped girl also claimed that she had never seen she before. During questioning, Nobuyuki made a shocking confession. He recalled the day he saw Fusako on the road and thought she was cute, so he decided to take her home with him. According to Nobuyuki, he took care of Fusako, feeding her, washing her, dressing her, and reading her comic books. He only punished her when she disobeyed him. Nobuyuki also admitted that he loved Fusako like a friend and believed she felt the same way about him. He had no intention of letting her go and hoped she would stay with him forever. He enjoyed spending time with her, talking to her for hours about soccer, music, or his favorite comic book characters, and she would listen silently. Nobuyuki claimed that he never locked his bedroom door, but Fusako never tried to escape, which led him to believe that she was happy living with him. A medical examination concluded that despite his mental disorder, Nobuyuki was able to understand his actions and thus was eligible to stand trial. However, questions were raised about whether his mother could be held accountable as an accomplice. She often bought feminine hygiene products for her son, which raised suspicions. Despite her repeated efforts to alert authorities and get medical help for her family, her concerns were consistently disregarded. The case drew widespread attention before the trial even began, the city police facing heavy criticism. Nobuyuki had previously been prosecuted for attempting to kidnap a schoolgirl. But he had managed to avoid suspicion when he carried out his plan. As a result, the local police chief and the head of the regional police department were removed from their posts for failing to control the situation from the start and making numerous mistakes. Nobuyuki Sato went on trial in May 2000. The prosecution thoroughly examined every detail of his actions, including minor offenses. Nobuyuki was found guilty and sentenced to 14 years in prison, the maximum term. He was released in the spring of 2015 after serving his sentence. By then, his mother had passed away in a nursing home, and Nobuyuki had no other relatives. He was found dead about a year and a half later, in early 2017, in a small rented room. The cause of his death was not disclosed. When Fusako was discovered, she was extremely weak and could barely stand. Doctors diagnosed her with exhaustion, dehydration, and muscle atrophy. She also stuttered, was afraid of sunlight, and had lost most of her communication skills. Her parents didn't even recognize their daughter when they saw her after nearly a decade. It took Fusako about a year to recover physically, but her mental health took much longer to heal. She suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder and became withdrawn, avoiding people. Her intelligence was also affected, remaining at the level of a 9-10 years old child. Her parents took her out of town, changed her name to Sachiko Yamada, and refused to speak to the press. Over time, Sachiko made friends, took up photography, and even passed her driver's license test. In 2007, a family outing took a devastating turn when her father accidentally drowned in a pond she tragically witnessed. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Patrick de la Cerda. Patrick de la Cerda was born in June 1992 in Miami, Florida, a city known for its picturesque metropolitan area. His father, Max Dira, was a native of Spain, while his mother, Patricia Ranza, was born and raised in France before moving to the United States in the 1980s, where she met and married Max. Patrick grew up in a warm family environment where he was surrounded by love, care, and mutual respect. He was a kind, intelligent, and sociable person who excelled in school and had a large circle of friends. From a young age, Patrick was very close to his parents, who prioritized his education and well-being, providing him with every opportunity to grow into a capable and responsible individual. Patrick's father was a dedicated and skilled professional in the construction industry. Although the family was not wealthy, they were considered well off by the standards of the big city. After completing high school, Patrick decided to follow in his father's footsteps and pursue a degree in construction. However, during his time at university, his parents made the difficult decision to divorce after nearly 25 years of marriage. The divorce of Patrick's parents was a quiet and peaceful one, with no scandals or disputes over property. After the separation, his mother moved to Deltona, a small town on the east coast of the state, where she eventually remarried. Patrick, on the other hand, chose to stay with his father in Miami, where they worked together in the construction industry and were highly respected. Despite the divorce, the family remained very close, and all members maintained a friendly relationship with one another. The family continued to stay in touch, regularly calling and communicating with each other. They were always willing to lend a helping hand when needed. Patrick often visited his mother in Deltona and shared with her details of his life, including his relationships and romantic interests. With his French and Spanish heritage, Patrick had grown up to be a charming and attractive young man, which helped him win over women at a relatively young age. Patrick grew up in a family that valued strong relationships, so he never sought casual flings. Instead, he dreams of finding lasting love, living peacefully, and building a lifelong family with someone special. He created a profile on a popular dating website at the suggestion of a friend, but he didn't have high hopes of actually meeting his soul mate on the dating website. One June evening in 2017, Patrick half-heartedly scrolled through profiles of women on the site. Then, he came across a photo that caught his attention, a stunning brunette with an unforgettable appearance, big, expressive eyes, and a charming smile. Patrick was immediately smitten and decided to send her a message. She replied, much to his delight, and they easily fell into a comfortable conversation. Jessica Devnani was born in 1988 in Orlando, Florida. After high school, she attended a local university where she studied banking. Following graduation, she landed a job at a bank branch in her hometown. Around that time, she met a handsome young man online. They quickly hit it off, exchanging messages and eventually phone numbers. They had long conversations every day, creating a deep emotional bond and strong trust. As their online friendship grew, they decided to meet in person. Since they lived in different parts of the state, they chose a meet-up spot roughly equidistant from each other. On their first date, Patrick knew he had found the person he had been searching for, and he didn't want to let her go. Jessica felt the same way about him. However, Jessica was slightly taken aback by their age difference. She was 4 years older than Patrick. After their date, on his way home, Patrick called his mother to tell her what happened. They had been in a long-distance relationship for months, which was becoming increasingly difficult. Due to the distance between them, they could only see each other on weekends, and even then, they had to meet at a location convenient for both of them. Usually, they will rent a cozy hotel room in a secluded spot and use the time to enjoy quality time together. However, by Sunday night, they would have to return to their respective homes, as they had work commitments on Monday mornings. In December 2017, Patrick made a significant decision. He relocated to Delton, where his mother lived, in order to be nearer to his girlfriend. He purchased a house in a quiet neighborhood and began making repairs to create a welcoming home for Jessica. Although she couldn't move right away because of work, but they made plans to get together again and have a housewarming party in early spring. They had a special celebration planned on New Year's Eve. To surprise Jessica, Patrick set up a fireworks display in the backyard, getting down on one knee to make his romantic proposal as they gazed up at the festive lights. Patrick got down on one knee, held out a box with a ring, and asked Jessica the most important question of all: would she become his wife? Overjoyed, Jessica happily agreed. Patrick had been looking for an engagement ring for a long time, but in jewelry stores there was no ring beautiful and delicate enough for the occasion. He chose the best option possible to propose before the new year, but he also had a custom ring made from a jewelry shop, designed by himself. Patrick's engagement was just 2 months old, and the wedding preparations were well underway. His choice of partner had been approved by their parents, and they was overjoyed as they prepared to start a new life together. They had plans for a grand celebration, either in Miami on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean or in France, where the groom's mother was from, on February 27, 2018. On that day, Patrick's father, Max, received a call from a courier while he was at work. The delivery man explained that Patrick's order has been delivered, but Patrick did not answer the door or answer the phone. Max was taken aback by Patrick's unexpected actions, which immediately raised his level of concern. Since Max was tied up at work and couldn't go check on Patrick, Max asked his future daughter-in-law to go instead. Patrick's father called Jessica in a panicked tone, saying he couldn't reach his son. Jessica had been trying to contact Patrick all morning, but he wasn't responding to her calls or messages. When she shared this with Patrick's father, Max, he feared the worst. Jessica immediately dropped everything and rushed to Patrick's house. When she arrived, she saw his car in the driveway, indicating he was still at home. Using her own key, she entered the yard and called out to Patrick, but there was no response. Jessica carefully opened the front door and was met with a horrific sight. Patrick was lying in a pool of blood, showing no signs of life. She quickly called emergency services, but the paramedics were unable to save Patrick and declared him dead at the scene. When the police arrived, Jessica was overcome with grief, sobbing in the backyard where Patrick had proposed to her just 2 months earlier. An officer spoke to her, and she raised her tear-filled eyes to meet his. She claimed to know who was accountable for Patrick's murder, naming her wealthy ex-boyfriend as the culprit. To comprehend this complex case and identify potential suspects, it's essential to revisit the past when Patrick first met Jessica. At that time, Jessica was in a relationship with Gregory Bender, a wealthy businessman who owned an investment fund. She met Gregory during her student years, and he was 20 years her senior. Gregory showered Jessica with expensive gifts and took her on lavish vacations, eventually winning her affection. Jessica thought she had found her soulmate, but soon she began to notice some disturbing patterns in her ex-boyfriend Gregory's behavior. He was extremely controlling, constantly monitoring her movements and interactions with others. If she had an admirer, Gregory would quickly get rid of them through threats and intimidation. Meanwhile, he kept his own life a mystery, sharing very little about himself with Jessica. Their relationship lasted nearly 8 years, during which time Gregory never introduced Jessica to his family or friends. They only spent time together or went on vacation when he wanted to, and he rarely invited her to his home. Gregory claimed he was too busy, but Jessica longed for a normal family life and children. However, every time she brought it up, Gregory would say it wasn't the right time. When Jessica tried to end the relationship, Gregory proposed to her with a ring, and she accepted. However, nothing changed. They still lived apart and only saw each other when Gregory wanted to. One day, Gregory was in a car accident and ended up in the hospital. When Jessica rushed to his side, she decided to stop by his house to pick up some things for him. That's when she encountered a woman she had never seen before. Instead of introducing herself, the stranger asked Jessica who she was. Jessica showed her the ring on her hand and that she was the landlord's fiancée. Jessica later found out that Gregory was married to someone else, Diora Sanchez Bender. Devastated, Jessica immediately broke off the relationship. However, Gregory really wanted to keep her, begging for forgiveness and promising to divorce his wife and marry Jessica in the future. Jessica eventually gave in and continued the affair, but as time went on, nothing changed, and Jessica became exhausted. Jessica changed her life and started dating someone new, Patrick, through a dating website. She then ended her relationship with Gregory and informed him that it was over. But Gregory did not give up and started to do worse things. Gregory asked Jessica to reconsider their relationship. He then became aggressive, and he resorted to threatening and harassing her. Realizing that Jessica had moved on, Gregory turned to private investigators to hack into her online accounts and find out who she was talking to. He soon discovered Patrick's identity and contact information. Then, Gregory started sending threatening messages to Patrick. Patrick received threatening messages from Gregory, Jessica's ex-boyfriend, who demanded that Patrick end his relationship with Jessica, referring to her as his fiancée. After receiving the threats, Patrick remained calm because he thought they would not come true. However, Jessica is scared because she knows Gregory's aggressive nature and that he has a large collection of weapons. She suggested breaking up with Patrick to avoid any potential harm, but Patrick refused. They decided to report the incidents to the police, providing evidence of Gregory's stalking and threats. They obtained a restraining order, which prohibited Gregory from approaching or contacting them. Additionally, Gregory was required to surrender his firearms. For a while, the situation seemed to calm down, and they thought they had finally found peace. Nevertheless, Jessica convinced Patrick to install CCTV cameras around and inside their home, fearing that Gregory might violate the restraining order. Let's go back to the events of February 27, 2018. During the initial crime scene inspection, investigators quickly ruled out robbery as a motive. Instead, they believed the murder was personally motivated, given the nature of Patrick's injuries, which suggested a deep-seated hatred. Patrick, 25 years old, had 4 gunshot wounds, 1 in the thigh, 1 in the chest, and 2 in the head. The body also showed signs of a fall from a ladder. The body was found on the floor between the front door and the stairs leading to the second floor. Investigators theorized that the killer likely snuck into the house and waited for the owner, Patrick, on the second floor. When Patrick entered the house and began to climb the stairs, the killer ambushed him, shooting him in the thigh. As Patrick rolled down the stairs, the killer followed, shooting him in the chest and then twice in the head. The murder weapon, a rare pistol, was not recovered, but several shell casings were found at the crime scene. The police found 3 casings at the scene, but a 4th one was missing. This led investigators to suspect that the killer might have taken it as a souvenir. The initial suspect was Patrick's neighbor, a U.S. Army veteran who had a history of conflict with Patrick. The veteran had been involved in combat and had suffered a severe head injury, which led to the development of a mental disorder. The veteran was skilled with firearms and had access to rare guns. In a previous incident, the veteran had mistakenly shot at his neighbor, thinking he was a burglar. After his release, the veteran continued to harass the victim, accusing him of being a spy and threatening to expose him. The investigation initially centered around the veteran with a history of mental health issues, as his unusual behavior and mindset suggested a possible motive for the crime. Although he truly hated Patrick, he still had an alibi for the time of the murder, confirmed by many witnesses. As the police looked for evidence and attempted to provoke a response from the perpetrator, it became clear that the crime was not a robbery gone, as the house was undisturbed and valuables remained untouched. The only items missing were the hard drives containing video surveillance footage, making it impossible to identify who entered and left the house that day. Furthermore, no evidence was found at the crime scene. Forensic experts were unable to find a single fingerprint, shoe print, or DNA trace, suggesting that the murder was meticulously planned and executed. Although the investigation suspected Gregory's involvement, it seemed likely that he would escape justice due to the lack of concrete evidence. The police asked Jessica to help them with a secret plan to catch her ex-boyfriend, Gregory, off guard. She agreed to make the call, and as the police had hoped, Gregory answered. Jessica tried to lure him into a conversation, but it quickly became apparent that he had anticipated the trap and was not falling for it. Gregory seemed unflappable as Jessica confronted him about Patrick's death. When she accused him directly, he acted shocked and even offered her his condolences. Despite her best efforts to get him to lose his cool, he didn't give away any incriminating information. In the end, the police didn't have enough evidence to hold or question Gregory, so he remained at large, abiding by the terms of a restraining order. He appeared to have already distanced himself from Jessica, makes gathering evidence more difficult. As the police investigation stagnated due to lack of evidence, Diora Sanchez, Gregory's wife, called to reveal she had vital information about Patrick's death. Upon arrival at the police station, Diora told investigators about discovering a cryptic notebook in Gregory's office just days before the crime occurred. Upon flipping through the notebook's pages, Diora stumbled upon an entry containing an address she didn't recognize, accompanied by a series of cryptic digits that appeared to be a code. Diora had previously ignored some suspicious sketches made by Gregory, but when she saw a news report about a young man's murder, she realized the significance of those sketches. The crime scene's layout matched the drawings Gregory had made. Diora informed the investigators, who then obtained a search warrant for Gregory's house. Upon searching, the police found a mysterious notebook in Gregory's office, but several key pages were missing. They later discovered those pages in a trash can, carelessly discarded after being ripped out and crumpled. The pages contained a detailed plan of the crime, including turning off the victim's phone, wearing gloves, and using a special lubricant on shoes to avoid leaving footprints. The records also revealed that Gregory had been stalking the victim, Patrick, and knew his daily routine, including the time he returned home. Furthermore, Gregory knew the location of surveillance cameras in and around Patrick's house, suggesting this was a carefully planned and executed crime. In addition to committing the crime, Gregory took steps to cover his tracks by disposing of the weapon, clothes, shoes, and gloves. However, he failed to destroy his own records, which later incriminated him. Furthermore, his wife's curiosity ultimately worked against him. A shell casing was discovered in a cigar box, which was meant to be taken as a trophy by the gunman. Forensic analysis confirmed that the casing matched the one found at the crime scene. The trial of Gregory posed a challenge due to the lack of direct evidence. Although the accumulated evidence was sufficient to arrest him, it was largely circumstantial. Since the crime weapon was never recovered, there was no definitive proof that Gregory was at the victim's house on the day of the crime. Moreover, there were no eyewitnesses to testify against him. The trial, which began in May 2021, more than 3 years after the crime, was heavily influenced by the skilled lawyers Gregory hired. He appeared confident and seemed to believe he would evade punishment. A crucial witness, Jessica, provided detailed testimony about her long-term relationship with Gregory, including his marital status, her attempts to break up with him, and the subsequent harassment and threats he made against her and Patrick. Jessica presented evidence of her conversations with Gregory, including screenshots of their conversations and their phone records. However, Gregory's lawyers countered by blaming Jessica, claiming that she was responsible for Gregory's behavior. They claimed that Jessica had started a new relationship with Patrick while still involved with Gregory, and that she had hurt his self-esteem. The defense downplayed the significance of the written plans for the murder, describing them as mere fantasies of a hurt man seeking revenge on his rival. They argued that Gregory never acted on these plans and therefore did not leave any evidence at the crime scene. Additionally, the lawyers claimed that the search of Gregory's home was conducted illegally and with procedural errors, suggesting that the shell casing found there could have been planted. The crime weapon was never found, and Jessica's identification of the gun model was uncertain. She had previously seen a similar gun in her boyfriend's collection, but she wasn't familiar with firearms and could have been mistaken. The defendant's ex-wife, Diora Sanchez, was called to testify. During her testimony, the defendant, Gregory, unexpectedly professed his love for Diora. This declaration seemed to affect Diora, and her testimony became unclear. Diora claimed to have forgotten some details and ultimately stated that she doubted Gregory's capability for murder, given their long history together. Despite the defense's efforts to challenge the search of Gregory's home and the lack of direct evidence, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder after hours of deliberation. Gregory was given a life sentence with no possibility of parole. As the judge read out the sentence, the defendant fixed Jessica with an intense stare, not blinking once. His glare made her feel nauseous. Jessica sat next to Patrick's mother and suddenly burst into uncontrollable sobs, finding it hard to breathe. Despite multiple attempts by Gregory's lawyers to appeal the verdict, all their efforts were unsuccessful. The case attracted public attention, with many outraged that a wealthy businessman had brutally murdered a working-class man and attempted to escape justice. Patrick's story was widely reported in the press, and Gregory remains in prison to this day. Jessica Dira said she is grateful that justice has been served, and Patrick's memory will always live on in her. She wears the engagement ring he gave her and a special piece of jewelry he had intended to give her but never got the chance. Jessica remains close to Patrick's parents, who have welcomed her into their family as one of their own. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sumner family. Carol and Reggie Sumner raised in Charleston, South Carolina. They were born in the same year, went to the same school, and were even in the same grade. Over time, their childhood friendship blossomed into a deeper affection. Neither of them recalls exactly when they began to develop romantic feelings for each other, but by the time they were 15 years old in 1959, they were dating. Their friends described them as a beautiful and harmonious couple. Reggie and Carol treasured their memories, keeping photos of their happy times together in their home archives. At the time, it seemed like they had their whole lives ahead of them, and they looked forward to a long and happy future together. Their feelings for each other were strong and mutual, and they were practically inseparable both in and out of school. They even started making plans to get married as soon as they turned 18, with the full support of their parents. In 1962, Reggie and Carol, a young couple, graduated from high school. However, their plans to get married were put on hold when Reggie was drafted into the Army a few months later. They decided to postpone their wedding until Reggie returned from his military service and made a promise to write each other regularly. As time passed, the separation took its toll. Reggie was deployed to Vietnam. Unfortunately, Carol lost contact with him, and she didn't even know if he was still alive. Despite the uncertainty, Carol continued her education and started working at the Charleston Air Force Base. A few years later, Carol got married, but the marriage was short-lived and ended in divorce. They didn't have any children together. In 1975, Carol married again, this time to Richard Alford, and gave birth to their daughter, Rhonda, in 1977. However, this marriage was also troubled, as Richard was abusive and had a drinking problem. The situation became unbearable for Carol, and by the mid-1980s, she couldn't take the abuse anymore. She took her daughter and filed for divorce. However, Richard refused to leave her alone and continued to harass her, trying to ruin her life. In 1987, Richard purchased a handgun and ammunition. After a night of heavy drinking, he went to his ex-wife Carol's home, intending to confront her. When Carol answered the door, their 10-year-old daughter Rhonda was present in the room. However, the presence of his child did not deter Richard, who was intoxicated. He pulled out the gun and shot Carol multiple times in front of Rhonda. Richard then drove to a secluded area, where he fired the remaining bullet into his temple, taking his own life. Carol was fortunate to survive the shooting due to the prompt response of neighbors, who heard the gunshots and Rhonda's cries for help. They called the police and an ambulance, which rushed Carol to the hospital. Carol's condition was critical, and she underwent several complex surgeries and blood transfusions. Although she eventually recovered, she suffered significant injuries, including complete blindness in her right eye and permanent disability. Years later, in the late 1990s, Carol's health began to deteriorate again. She experienced severe pain, weight loss, and weakness. After a thorough examination at the hospital, she received a devastating diagnosis: liver cancer. Tragically, as a result of being severely injured by gunshot wounds, Carol lost her position on an Air Force base. With cancer added to her medical complications, she found that physical strain, prolonged periods on her feet, and any heavy physical exertion exceeded her capability. Given these medical constraints, Carol then decided to re-enter the workforce as a call center operator for a cable television provider within her hometown, Charleston. Reggie was in Vietnam for a long time, and due to the prolonged war, he was severely wounded and nearly lost his leg. He spent a significant amount of time in the hospital, and during this period, his name was mistakenly listed among the dead. As a result, his relatives believed he had passed away. Reggie was fortunate to survive and eventually returned home. However, by then, he had lost touch with his former lover, Carol, who had moved to a different location, got married, and also assumed Reggie had died in the war. Years later, Reggie got married, but his war injuries led to the development of diabetes and other chronic diseases. He was never able to become a father, and eventually, his marriage ended in separation. Since then, he has lived alone. Reggie found work as a laborer at the local railroad and no longer expected any pleasant surprises from life. In the fall of 2000, Carol was having a typical day at work, answering phones and advising customers. When she picked up another call, she was shocked to hear a voice that sent shivers down her spine. It was a voice she knew all too well, her first high school love, Reggie. However, she was hesitant to respond, as she had thought Reggie was dead. After answering the customer's questions, Carol mustered up the courage to say Reggie's full name out loud. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by Reggie's timid question. Carol burst into tears, revealing that she was he had dated in high school, the one he had once wanted to marry. For several minutes, they both cried, unable to speak. Eventually, they composed themselves and discovered that they still lived in their hometown. They agreed to meet the next evening, reuniting after all these years. The next day, Carol spent hours getting ready for the date, trying on different dresses and perfecting her hair and makeup. As she looked in the mirror, she was reminded that time had changed her. She was no longer the young, vibrant woman Reggie remembered from the past. Still, she was eager to win him over once more. Their meeting was thrilling for both, having spent decades apart, and their conversation was unrelenting as they recounted stories from their lives, both happy and sorrowful, covering their previous marriages. Professional triumphs, struggles, health challenges, and basking in nostalgia as they reflected on their lost romance and first true love for one another. Reggie and Carol were determined to make the most of their reunion after a period of separation. They quickly fell into a routine of spending every day together, and within a couple of weeks, they decided to take the next step by moving in together. Just 5 months later, they got married, and Carol joined her husband in his home in the Riverland Terrace neighborhood. As they settled into family life, they initially resided in their hometown of Charleston, South Carolina. They were deeply in love, happy, and enthusiastic about building a life together. However, they faced some challenges, particularly with their health, as they were both still young but struggling with health issues. One of the neighbors who lived nearby was the Cole family, with whom Reggie had a long-standing acquaintance. The patriarch of the family, Stephen, had experienced firsthand the traumatic effects of the Vietnam War. Sustaining severe wounds during combat had resulted in confinement to a wheelchair for many years. His wife, Natalie, often prioritized her social life, spending time with friends at bars after work, instead of rushing home to take care of her family. As a result, their daughter, Tiffany, found herself frequently neglected and left unattended from a young age. Tiffany's situation improved slightly when she befriended the new neighbors, Reggie and Carol. During this time, Tiffany was still in high school, and the compassionate Carol took an instant liking to she. Carol felt genuine sympathy for Tiffany. For 5 years, Carol did her best to support and care for Tiffany, sometimes sponsoring cozy family meals, buying Tiffany clothes, and sharing enough allowance. Carol treated Tiffany like a daughter, showering her with love, care, and attention. When the Carol and Reggie decided to sell their Chevrolet Lumina minivan in 2004, Tiffany asked to buy it from them on an installment plan, as she desperately needed a car but had no money. They kindly offered to sell it to her for a minimal amount, which they divided into 12 monthly payments. In early 2005, Carol and Reggie made a difficult decision to leave their home and relocate to Florida. Their health had begun to decline significantly, and doctors advised them to move to a warmer climate with ocean access. Since Carol and Reggie were both retired, they decided to make a big change and start over. Carol and Reggie sold their large home in Charleston and bought a new place in Jacksonville, Florida. They also purchased a new Lincoln Town car. They was very happy and settled into their new life, making plans for their future together. Carol would call her adult daughter Rhonda every day to share her thoughts, plans, and daily experiences. However, in June 2005, Rhonda was surprised and concerned when her mother didn't call her as usual. At first, Rhonda tried to brush off her worries, hoping that everything was fine with her parents and that they would call her back soon. But when the next day passed without hearing from them, Rhonda's concern grew. She tried calling her parents' cell phones every 30 minutes, but they were now out of service. She also left messages on their home phone, but none of them were returned. Rhonda set out on a solo road trip to check on her mother and stepfather in another state. After a 5-hour drive, she arrived at their house. What struck her as unusual was the absence of a car in the driveway. Things only got stranger from there. As she approached the front door, she found it slightly ajar, an eerie quietness, and a light on in one of the rooms despite the bright sunlight outside. Rhonda called out for her mother and stepfather Reggie, but received no response. She ventured into the kitchen, where she was greeted by a scene that looked like a sudden and mysterious departure. A table was set for two, with food that appeared to have been left untouched for days. The rest of the house was also in disarray, with belongings scattered about and doors and cupboards left open. Adding to the sense of abandonment and unease, their bedroom showed signs of a thorough search, but it was unclear what the person was looking for or who was responsible. On the bedside table, essential medications were left behind, including her mother's cancer pills, which she took 3 times a day, and Reggie's insulin, which he administered hourly. Notably, their cell phones were completely out of battery, rendering them useless. Rhonda quickly realized that her mother and stepfather were unable to leave their home without their essential medications and cell phones. She immediately contacted the police to report the incident, alerting them to the suspicious individuals. They in the car was quickly added to the wanted list, and all bank cards belonging to Carol and Reggie were frozen. The first few days of the search yielded nothing, with no sign of the imposters or any witnesses. However, on June 12, several developments led the police to close in on the perpetrators. A crucial lead emerged when a man, claiming to be Reggie, contacted one of the banks, complaining that his card was blocked and he was unable to withdraw cash. A bank employee grew suspicious when checking the card information and offered to resolve the issue by visiting a nearby branch, but the caller, Mr. Reggie, hung up. Minutes later, a woman called from the same number, claiming to be Mrs. Carroll, and reported a similar problem with her card being blocked. When the bank asked her to visit a branch in person, she refused, citing health issues, and urgently requested access to her savings. Her request was denied. The bank promptly handed over the call details and recordings to the police. The police investigation continued at the station, where they played the suspicious phone calls for Rhonda. She immediately confirmed that the voices did not belong to her Carol and Reggie. In fact, the voices sounded too young to be them. As a result, the authorities believed that the imposters were likely involved in the Carol and Reggie disappearance, either holding them captive or killing them after extracting information about their bank accounts and cards. The search for the missing couple led to a breakthrough a few days later, when their car was discovered abandoned on a remote road in a wooded area. A thorough examination of the vehicle revealed no signs of blood or struggle in the cabin. However, in the trunk, experts found hair and sweat marks that belonged to they. This suggested that they had been forcibly taken away in the trunk of their own car, leaving little hope for their safe return. The police investigated their bank transactions and found that money had been withdrawn from their account several times after they stopped hearing from their daughter. Reviewing the ATM surveillance footage revealed that the withdrawals were made by a young man who couldn't be identified right away. The police also requested a trace of all calls made from the phone number used by the imposters to contact the bank. Further investigation showed that the SIM card used to make those calls was purchased on a prepaid plan just before they disappeared. Unfortunately, the buyer's identity couldn't be determined, but it was discovered that the number was used to call a car rental company on June 6. Additionally, it was found that someone staying at a hotel had rented a Mazda RX-8 in the name of Tiffany Cole. Later, the same car was seen at the ATMs where the unidentified young man withdrew money from their accounts. A team of investigators used tracking beacons installed in rental cars to locate a Mazda RX-8, which was found parked at a hotel in Charleston. The car was linked to a couple who had been victimized by thieves, who had withdrawn $1,000 from her card and nearly $3,000 from her husband's card. A capture team was quickly dispatched to the hotel, where they burst into the room where the thieves were staying. The room was found to be filled with numerous packages and receipts from various stores, indicating that the thieves had been on a spending spree, purchasing items such as clothing, electronics, video games, cosmetics, perfumes, and expensive liquor. 3 people were found inside the location, clearly caught off guard by the police visit. Tiffany Cole, 23, her boyfriend Michael Jackson, 24, and Alan Lindell Wade, 19, all appeared surprised, confused, and frightened as police placed handcuffs on their wrists. The trio was taken to the police station, separated into different rooms for questioning, and initially pretended to be unaware of the accusations or refused to speak. A search of the premises uncovered significant evidence, including stolen bank cards, the laptop, some of Carol's jewelry, Reggie's expensive coin collection, the keys to their Lincoln Town car, and pawn shop receipts in Tiffany Cole's name. During the investigation, it was discovered that Tiffany had sold some of the stolen jewelry and spent the money with friends. After several hours of interrogation, Tiffany finally began to talk, bursting into tears as she confessed that she and her friends had robbed the elderly couple but claimed no further harm was done. The group then went on the run, using the stolen money for their own gain. Tiffany also implicated another individual, Bruce Kent Nixon, 19, who was paid $300 for his assistance in the crime. She stated that they never saw Bruce Kent Nixon again after the incident. Bruce Kent Nixon's decision to commit a crime was motivated by a promise of a fixed amount of money, which he quickly spent on illicit substances. As a result, he did not make an effort to hide or flee, living in the same city of Charleston. He was eventually arrested at his parents' home. It began in May 2005, when Tiffany visited the Summers to make a payment on a car she had purchased 6 months prior. The Summers, Carol, and Reggie were known for their hospitality and would often invite Tiffany to stay overnight or for a few days, treating her to good food and gifts. On this particular occasion, Tiffany arrived with her new boyfriend, and they were both welcomed to dinner and invited to stay overnight. During dinner, the Summers discussed their new life, and Carol inadvertently revealed that they had nearly $100,000 left over from the sale of their Charleston home, which they intended to use to enjoy their retirement without financial worries. Unbeknownst to her, Carol's careless comment sealed her in her husband's fate. Tiffany and Michael exchanged a telling glance, and that night, they began secretly plotting to get their hands on the Summers' substantial sum of money. In the morning, Tiffany and Michael bid they farewell and returned to South Carolina. Within a couple of weeks, they recruited accomplices and assigned roles and responsibilities. They then set their plan in motion. On June 6th, Tiffany rented an unassuming car. Meanwhile, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan stole 4 shovels. Together, they drove to the outskirts of Jacksonville, where they identified a secluded spot in the woods and started digging a deep hole, which would ultimately become the Summers' grave. On the morning of July 8th, Tiffany purchased rope and duct tape from a hardware store, which she later provided to her accomplices, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan. That evening, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan approached the home of their intended victim, pretending to need assistance and asking to use the phone. Despite finding the young men suspicious, the homeowner, Carol, allowed them to enter. As soon as they were inside, they attacked Carol and her husband, who had rushed to her aid, threatening them with a toy gun. The Carol and Reggie was then bound with duct tape, blindfolded, and interrogated about the location of valuable items in the house, including their bank account information and PIN codes. They provided this information in an attempt to save their lives, as they were subjected to torture and death threats. After obtaining the necessary details, 2 additional individuals entered the house, assisting in dragging the Carol and Reggie into the backyard. They was then forced into the trunk of their own car, a Lincoln, which was being driven by Alan and Bruce Kent Nixon. Following behind them in a rented Mazda ARX-8 were Tiffany and Michael. The plan was that if a police patrol intercepted the car carrying the captive couple, a second car would draw the officers' attention away by recklessly speeding or breaking traffic rules. However, no police were encountered, and both cars reached their destination without incident. In the trunk, Reggie managed to free his arm and remove the bandages and duct tape covering his and his wife's faces, allowing them to breathe. However, there was no time to make any further attempts to escape. As the trunk lid opened, the Carol and Reggie was shocked and bewildered to see among their kidnappers Tiffany and her boyfriend, who had visited them recently. The kidnappers led the captive Carol and Reggie several dozen meters through the woods to a pre-dug grave. The Carol and Reggie begged for mercy, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. The young kidnappers brutally murdered them by burying them alive. According to Bruce Kent Nixon, the kidnappers spent about an hour burying the Carol and Reggie under earth. Throughout the horrific ordeal, the bound and helpless Carol and Reggie cried, confessed their love for each other, and said their goodbyes. The investigation revealed that the spouses had died from suffocation, with soil found in their mouths, respiratory tracts, and stomachs, indicating they had been buried alive. After committing the heinous crime, the perpetrators abandoned the Lincoln in the woods and returned to town in a rented car. They then went to the Sumner house, where they stole all the valuables they could find, before returning to South Carolina to spend their loot. However, their freedom was short-lived, as the stolen cards were blocked after 2 days, and all participants in the crime were arrested 4 days later. During the trial, Bruce Kent Nixon was the only one who fully admitted his guilt from the beginning and cooperated with the investigation, hoping for a lighter sentence. He led the authorities to the burial site of the spouses and provided a detailed account of the events of that fateful night. In contrast, Tiffany claimed that her boyfriend, Michael, was the mastermind behind the crime, driven by greed after learning about the large sum of money the Sumner family had received from the sale of their house. Tiffany's lawyer argued that she was merely an accomplice and not directly involved in the murder. Michael and Alan chose not to testify, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. The jury did not believe Tiffany Cole was innocent because she was involved in planning the crime, rented a car, and created a diversion in case they were chased by police. She also helped dig a grave for the victims and sold stolen items at a pawn shop, using the money to buy clothes and rent a limousine to celebrate their success, as seen in numerous photos. As a result, Bruce Kent Nixon was sentenced to life in prison without parole, while Michael Jackson, Tiffany, and Alan Lindell were given the death penalty. The criminals filed multiple appeals, but they were all denied, and the sentence remained unchanged. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Autumn Taggart. Autumn Taggart, a single mother, lived in Windsor, a city near the Michigan-Ontario border, with her 9-year-old son Gavin in 2018. Despite her breakup with Gavin's father, Chris Sherwin, they remained on good terms to minimize the impact on their child. On Saturday, June 9, 2018, Autumn and Gavin spent the afternoon with Chris, and after grocery shopping together, he dropped them off at their third-floor apartment. After Chris left, Gavin played video games with his mother before bedtime, unaware of the horrifying night that was about to unfold. Gavin woke up to a noise while it was still dark outside. Startled, he opened his eyes to see a strange man standing close to his bed. The man instructed Gavin to close his eyes and go back to sleep before leaving the room. Gavin knew his mother's room was located behind the wall to the right, as shown in the photo. About a minute later, he heard his mother scream. The boy had never felt such intense fear before. The screaming eventually stopped, and an eerie silence fell over the space. After a few minutes, Gavin fell asleep, overcome with exhaustion. Gavin woke up to find it was already morning. He got out of bed and went straight to his mother's room. He was met with a scene of utter destruction. Everything was smashed and broken. His mother, Autumn, was lying on the bed, but she wasn't asleep. At first, 9-year-old Gavin thought she was just resting, but the blood on her nose told a different story. The reality hit him like a ton of bricks. His mother was dead. Gavin was in denial, refusing to accept the truth. To distract himself from the grim reality, he spent the morning playing video games on his console and watching YouTube videos, trying to avoid the unpleasant fact that his deceased mother was lying in the next room. In the afternoon, Gavin couldn't take the pressure anymore and broke down in tears. He decided to confide in someone, so he went to his mother's room, took her phone, and messaged his father on Messenger. He typed out a desperate message. Autumn wasn't waking up. Chris and his girlfriend quickly got in their car and drove to Gavin and Autumn's home. When they arrived, Chris parked the car and got out, spotting his son standing behind a sliding glass door on the third floor. However, Chris didn't have an electronic key to enter the building, so Gavin came downstairs to let him in. Chris asked his son to wait with his girlfriend while he went to investigate why Autumn wasn't waking up. Chris entered the apartment, proceeded to the bedroom, and was shocked to see Autumn's pale appearance. Her face and body were bruised, and her nose was bloody. He immediately dialed 911. The police and an ambulance arrived at the address he provided, where the paramedics examined Autumn's body and surveyed the signs of struggle in the bedroom. Given the extent of her injuries and the evidence of a fierce fight, they sadly had no option but to pronounce her dead, concluding that it was no accident. Investigators searched the apartment for clues, while a specialist in child interrogation spoke with Gavin, who revealed that an overnight guest had instructed him to go to bed. Gavin recounted hearing his mother's screams, but they abruptly ceased. He provided a description of the man he saw in his room that night, saying he appeared to be a white male of average height with messy hair, resembling someone who had just rolled out of bed. According to Gavin, the man was skinny, but not too skinny. The autopsy concluded that Autumn's death was the result of strangulation. Furthermore, it was discovered that she had been physically assaulted prior to her death, with injuries found in her genital area. Additionally, male DNA samples were recovered from her body. The investigation aimed to address several key questions, including how the perpetrator gained access to the apartment, what motivated the crime, and most crucially, the identity of the individual who had entry to the building, as an electronic key was required for entry. The police quickly ruled out the possibility that the killer was one of the building's residents, since Gavin was familiar with all his neighbors and the man he spotted on the night of the murder was not among them. To commit the crime, the perpetrator would have needed not only an electronic key to access the building, but also a way to enter Autumn's apartment, which presented a problem. There were no signs of forced entry on the door to her apartment, suggesting that either she had let the perpetrator in voluntarily or had failed to lock the door. Eventually, the police abandoned their initial assumptions when they discovered evidence that the perpetrator had accessed the third floor. It emerged that the individual had first climbed up to the second-floor balcony and then made their way to the third floor, where they found the door was already open, allowing them to enter the apartment unimpeded. In addition to the DNA sample, the police also found fingerprints at the scene, which they were working to match to their owner. It wasn't until 12 days after the body was discovered that the police finally released the victim's identity, in the hope that this would lead to new tips from the public. The authorities are seeking anyone with information that could aid the investigation to come forward and contact the detectives. A witness reported seeing a new black SUV, possibly a Honda Pilot, in the parking lot adjacent to the building on the night of the crime. The vehicle was seen in the lot until around 6 a.m. Detectives believe the SUV's owner may have been involved in Autumn's death and hypothesized that the individual used the roof of their car as a stepping stone to climb higher. Specifically, they think the perpetrator exploited the building's decorative protrusions, which resemble steps, to ascend from the second floor to the third. The nighttime crime scene presented an advantage to investigators as most people are asleep then, resulting in fewer mobile phones being active. By analyzing phone activity in Autumn's area, they were able to narrow down the list of active numbers near the crime scene. During the investigation, detectives found that one of the phone numbers belonged to a neighbor of Autumn's, who lived in the same building. Although the neighbor claimed to know nothing about the incident during her police interview, her alibi didn't quite add up. Phone records showed that she had made calls from her apartment and various locations around the city, and her phone was switched off around the time Autumn's life was taken. While it was difficult to pinpoint her exact location due to the margin of error in phone tracking, it was clear that she was being evasive and hiding something from the detectives. So they went to speak with Michelle again. She reiterated that she didn't know anything and hadn't heard anything, but the police subtly warned her that if it was later discovered she had withheld vital information from the investigation, she could be considered an accomplice to the crime. As a result, she began to talk. Michelle said that around 2 a.m. that night, a man known to them as Jay got in touch with her and her boyfriend. Jay was looking to buy illegal drugs and also wanted to hire an escort. The three of them drove to an ATM where Jay withdrew some cash. After that, Michelle and her boyfriend handed over a certain amount of the drug to Jay. Michelle admitted that she and her boyfriend were drug dealers. Later, Jay asked them to sell him more drugs. According to Michelle, she then told Jay to drive to the parking lot near her building. Michelle confessed that she and her boyfriend had planned to rob Jay. Upon arrival at the building, the three individuals ingested illicit drugs. Following this, Michelle and her boyfriend resolved to abscond with the remaining drugs. Prior to their escape, Michelle concealed a bag of the drugs within her genital area. According to Michelle, she and her boyfriend escaped, stealing not just the substance, but also a significant amount of Jay's money. They fled to the building's entrance, then went up to the apartment, where they barricaded themselves inside, sitting silently in the dark. Jay was unable to enter the building since he lacked an electronic key, and he couldn't yell or honk his horn, fearing that someone might alert the police. According to Michelle, when they looked out the window, they noticed shoe marks on the roof of Jay's car. Additionally, a man was seen driving away at approximately 6 a.m. Investigators theorized that Jay must have climbed into the building, attempting to track down those responsible for stealing the substance and money from him. However, as he was unaware of Michelle's residence, it's likely that he inadvertently entered Autumn's apartment by mistake, The police obtained the suspect's phone number and photo from a camera at the bank entrance where he withdrew cash to buy the substance, and from an ATM camera. Investigators learned that the man's real name was Jitesh Bogle, a 27-year-old Canadian citizen who lived and worked as a car development engineer in Warren, Michigan. He was also the owner of a black Honda Pilot SUV and frequently crossed the river by bridge or tunnel to visit Canada, specifically Windsor, almost daily. Authorities tracked the suspect's movements, discovering he had left Canada on June 10th, the morning Autumn died, and had not returned to the country since. Following the police release of information about the black SUV seen at the victim's house, Jitesh sold his car. Canadian police collaborated with their American counterparts, learning Jitesh planned to relocate from Michigan to Washington State, where his parents resided in Kent. The combination of his decision to move, disposing of the car, and ceasing visits to Canada raised strong suspicions, but the police required concrete evidence to arrest and extradite him to Canada. The Windsor police requested assistance from the U.S. National Security Agency in their investigation and asked them to closely monitor the suspect's activities. DNA evidence found on Autumn's body suggested it belonged to Jitesh, but to confirm this, they needed to obtain a DNA sample from him for comparison. U.S. agents tracked the suspect's every move, aware that he was planning to relocate to Washington State and fearing he might flee to another country. In an effort to alter his appearance, Jitesh shaved his beard and started wearing blue contact lenses. Fortunately for the investigators, Jitesh was reckless. One day, he visited a bar in Warren, where he spent several hours drinking. When he downed his last glass and exited the bar, the agents swiftly seized the glass, thereby obtaining a DNA sample from it. Although it took some time to compare this new sample with the one found on Autumn's body, the outcome was not unexpected. The male DNA discovered on the victim's body was identified as a match to Jitesh Bogle's DNA. On August 17, 2018, nearly 2.5 months following Autumn Taggart's tragic demise, Jitesh was taken into custody at his parents' residence in Kent, Washington, a development that caught him off guard, as he appeared to believe the authorities would be unable to locate him. The U.S. authorities promptly initiated the extradition process to have him returned to his native country. In the supporting extradition documents, the prosecutor underscored Jitesh's perceived threats to public safety, his high risk of fleeing, and his unpredictable nature. Soon after, Canadian authorities charged him with the murder of Autumn Taggart. Due to pandemic-related restrictions, the trial was delayed for an extended period. However, it finally began in November 2021. To maintain social distancing, the proceedings took place in 3 separate courtrooms: the main courtroom, where the judge, prosecutor, jury, and the defendant with his defense team were seated, and 2 additional courtrooms equipped with large screens broadcasting the trial to Autumn's family members and other observers. Jitesh Bogle denied committing first-degree deprivation of life, claiming he unintentionally killed Autumn. He explained that earlier, some thieves stole money and drugs from his car, leaving him upset. After consuming a large amount of alcohol and substances, he got out of the vehicle to search for the thieves. Due to his intoxication, he didn't recall many events from that night. However, he remembered climbing onto the balcony and entering the apartment where Autumn was sleeping, mistakenly thinking she was Michelle, the woman who had robbed him. When Autumn awoke and started screaming, he ordered her to be quiet, but she disobeyed. In response, he covered her mouth, which led to her suffocation. Only after the screaming stopped did Jitesh realize he had accidentally taken Autumn's life, and he attempted to perform CPR on her, but it was too late. Jitesh had no memory of how Autumn's genital injuries occurred or how he left her apartment. His lawyers requested that the first-degree life imprisonment charges be dropped, arguing that the crime was not premeditated. They believed Jitesh was unaware of his actions due to the large quantity of substances he had consumed. The fact that he placed his hand over Autumn's mouth suggests he wanted her to be quiet, not dead. According to defense lawyer Peter Thorning, Jitesh lacked the capacity to form intent or understand the consequences of his actions. Thorning claimed that intoxication was the sole explanation for Jitesh's behavior, and that sometimes tragic events occur without intending the outcome. He stated that Autumn's death was not intentional, and that Jitesh was either too intoxicated to realize his actions could cause death or did not appreciate the consequences. Jitesh's lawyers argued that there was no evidence to suggest the defendant had sexual intercourse with the victim. Although Jitesh's DNA was found on Autumn's body, it was not seminal fluid, according to the lawyers. They suggested that the DNA could have been transferred through cross-contamination, where DNA is accidentally transferred from one surface to another, possibly through the forensic expert's gloves. The defense team attempted to convince the jury that John Lort, a forensic expert involved in the investigation, had botched his job and inadvertently transferred Jitesh's DNA to Autumn Taggart's body. As part of his role, Lort was responsible for photographing the crime scene and collecting evidence that came into direct contact with the victim. Jitesh's defense lawyer, Peter Thorning, questioned Lort about the possibility of DNA or fluid transfer from the body to the bedsheet or vice versa during the manipulation of the body, which is a known phenomenon referred to as cross-contamination. Lort stated during cross-examination that he changed gloves between handling each piece of evidence and using his camera to take photographs, thus preventing cross-contamination. In his examination of evidence in Taggart's room, Lort searched for bodily fluids such as urine, saliva, and semen, as he explained that in cases involving a deceased female victim, the likelihood of sexual assault is higher compared to cases involving a male victim. Lort testified to the court that he did not find any fluid evidence consistent with sexual assault. He acknowledged that his examination of the body was limited, as he was not a trained medical professional, such as a coroner. Lort testified that there were no obvious signs of a struggle at Autumn's apartment, such as broken furniture or glass, forced entry, tampered locks, or blood spatter. In contrast, the prosecutor believed that the defendant's actions constituted a search for hidden substances, similar to how Michelle had hidden them in her genital area. The prosecutor argued that the defendant committed sexual assault by searching Autumn's body in the same way, regardless of whether he used his hand. When questioned by the prosecutor about why he didn't call 911 when Autumn stopped breathing, Jitesh disagreed, saying he didn't think it was necessary. Jitesh responded that he feared the police would arrest him because he knew nobody would take his word for it. He could hardly believe his own story, as he recounted in his testimony. Jitesh acknowledged that his memory of the events in Autumn's room was hazy. However, he did recall performing CPR on Autumn after she had stopped screaming. Previously, he had testified that he remembered counting 5 or 6 ribs down before starting CPR, and that he had done 15 compressions accompanied by 3 breaths. The prosecutor also challenged the defendant's claim that the strangulation of the victim was accidental. He pointed out that if the defendant simply wanted to silence Autumn, he could have covered her mouth with his hand. Instead, he also pinched her nose shut, which deliberately prevented her from breathing. Moreover, he sustained this grip for a period of time, indicating that he was fully aware of his actions. Chris Sherwin, Autumn Taggart's former partner and the father of their son, was the last person to hear from her via text message around 12:30 a.m. on June 10th. After sending a follow-up text and receiving no response, he grew concerned. It wasn't until later that day that he received a text from Autumn's phone, only to discover it was their son responding. The court displayed a copy of these text messages for the jury to review on December 1st, 2021. Following deliberation, the 12-person jury found Jitesh Bogle guilty of depriving Autumn of her life. Despite allegations, they found no convincing evidence that Jitesh had engaged in sexual intercourse with Autumn. Autumn's father, John Tager, expressed relief and gratitude for the verdict, stating, "Can't say we weren't nervous. but it's definitely the right verdict. Autumn deserved this. Her son deserved this. Justice. That's what we wanted. That's what we got. The family members were visibly relieved, hugging each other in celebration. On January 5, 2022, the court sentenced Jitesh Bogle to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 25 years before he is eligible for parole. Jitesh appeared in court via video from jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit and a black mask. During the victim impact statements, he sat quietly against the wall, distant from the camera. When given the opportunity to speak, he expressed remorse, saying, "It's hard to express the sorrow and remorse I feel. I am happy for the family that they have a sense of justice, and they can move on. Part of my soul died that day as well." Autumn's father, John Tager, reiterated his desire for Canadian laws to change, stating, "We'd still like to see the laws in Canada change for life sentences to actual life, not 25 years and then parole. We'd like life to mean life for all victims." Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Stephen Freeman. The victim, Stephen Andrew Freeman, was born on January 1, 1995, in Thomason, Georgia, to Troy and Jennifer Freeman. He and his brother Blake grew up as happy, healthy children without any problems with their parents or society. Kind and responsive, Stephen had many friends, and everyone described him as an exceptionally calm and balanced person. Stephen grew up in Griffin, where he later attended Spalding High School and Gordon State College to complete his education. Mary Catherine Higdon was also raised in a respectable family, somewhat carefree, impetuous, humorous, and friendly. She was drawn to creativity. She often put on mini plays and performed them in front of her family and neighbors. Mary and Stephen fell in love with each other in their senior years and have been inseparable since. The young couple had a lot of common interests. Both loved being in nature. They went hiking, fishing, and even hunting together. In 2012, Stephen Freeman updated his Facebook status to indicate he was in a relationship and regularly shared various photos with his partner. Mary's family was fond of her boyfriend, and Steve's parents also accepted his girlfriend as their own daughter. After graduating from school, the young couple moved in together. Stephen got a job as a plumber at Drain W Gutters and Roofing Inc., and Mary Catherine worked as a teacher's assistant at St. George's Episcopal School. She also worked part-time as a sales associate at a gun store. By the summer of 2018, Stephen and Mary had been living together for 7 years but had not gotten married. On August 1, 2018 at 10:42 p.m., emergency services received an alarm call. The caller, 24-year-old Mary Catherine Higdon, screamed hysterically into the phone that she had accidentally shot her boyfriend. She reported grabbing a Glock 43 firearm, unaware that there was a bullet in the chamber. When paramedics and police arrived at Sunnybrook Drive, she was in a state of shock. She knelt in front of the motionless and bloodied body of the young man lying on the bed, crying incessantly, gasping and begging the doctors to help him. "I can't lose him. I can't lose him," she cried. Law enforcement officers struggled to pull Mary Catherine away from the victim to examine him and provide first aid. 23-year-old Stephen Freeman, wounded in the chest just below the neck, was still breathing. He was immediately transported to Spalding Regional Hospital. Unfortunately, a few minutes before midnight, the young man's heart stopped. Not fully comprehending the tragedy that had occurred and still in shock, Mary had to visit the police station to give her account of the events. She was called in for questioning, where she, still completely stunned, claimed that the shot was accidental. She explained that there had always been firearms in their home, and that Stephen would leave a pistol on the nightstand for self-defense before going to sleep, as their house was located outside the city. On that fateful evening, she merely wanted to hand Stephen the pistol, and it accidentally discharged. She had no idea the gun was loaded. Mary Catherine insisted that Stephen Freeman was the love of her life, and she would never harm him, especially not intentionally. Examining the scene, investigators did not rule out the possibility that the act might have been premeditated, and they had substantial arguments to support this theory. There were signs of a struggle in the kitchen, with food and dishes scattered about. Detectives Adam Trammell and Chris Wilson found Mary's story improbable and continued the investigation, examining the evidence. Mary Catherine was called in for a second interrogation, where the investigators used aggressive tactics. They yelled at her, expressed skepticism about her account, and demanded the truth. This approach was effective, and Mary Catherine confessed to shooting her boyfriend in a fit of anger. She explained that they had a heated argument, and she wanted to leave him. The investigators had recorded the conversation and obtained a confession, indicating a case that had been resolved. However, a significant technical issue arose, resulting in the loss of most of the recording, with only background interference and indistinct noises remaining. The reason for this loss and the lack of a backup copy of this crucial evidence remained unexplained. Further investigation revealed that the pistol could not have been fired accidentally, as it required a deliberate trigger pull. Additionally, for the bullet to have struck Stephen in the way it did, the pistol had to have been pointed directly at the victim. Detectives also closely examined Mary's behavior, with some suspecting that she may have been overacting and exaggerating her distress. The detectives remained diligent, carefully piecing together their theory of the tragedy based on the emerging evidence and proof. Another critical fact cast doubt on the accident in Mary Catherine's words. Investigators learned that she worked at a gun store, where employees undergo thorough training on handling various firearms before starting work. This meant she undoubtedly knew how to safely hand over a pistol without causing harm. The picture of an accident didn't align with the new facts that the investigation uncovered. She changed her statement several times, and her hysterical state sometimes interrupted the interrogation. However, she reiterated that it was an accident. In another conversation, Mary Catherine told the police that at Stephen's request, she tossed the pistol to hand it to him, and the weapon accidentally discharged. This did not match what she had told the investigators at the scene and during the first interrogation, where she repeatedly stated that she was simply handing Stephen the pistol hand to hand, not tossing it, and that's when it accidentally fired below his neck. These changing statements worked against Mary Catherine as she was caught lying, and every word was scrutinized for hidden intent, indicating guilt or concealment. Mary was detained and held in the Spalding County Jail during her trial. She was charged with felony murder, malice murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm while committing a crime. Lieutenant Wilson strongly disputed Mary's claim that it was an accident and tried to prove that her actions were a deliberate and meticulously planned act. A new piece of evidence in this case was common cooking grease found on the slide of the pistol. The slide also had lubricant, suggesting that at some point, the magazine must have been emptied, bullets were loaded, and the pistol was then placed on a shelf. In her defense, Mary Catherine told the police that she was indeed preparing dinner for Stephen that evening, and the dinner found scattered on the kitchen floor explained the presence of grease on the slide. Subsequent interrogations of the couple's relatives and friends did not provide the clarity expected in this case. Many friends claimed that this teenage love turned into a roller coaster ride for Stephen and Mary, until their relationship nearly ended and then reignited with new passion. It became genuinely complicated in recent years. The lovers often argued over emerging disagreements. Mary turned every argument into a dramatic event, screaming at Stephen and attacking him, after which he often left the house to spend the night with friends, turning off his phone as Mary continued to call and text him. She tried to control his every move, driving Stephen to frustration. The guy shared with friends that during arguments and fights, Mary pointed a pistol at him or herself, threatening to end her life or his. Stephen never reported this to the police, fearing Mary would be jailed. And this was not the only instance when Mary resorted to using a weapon. There were plenty of weapons in their home. During an interrogation, Stephen's friend Thomas Skinner shared that 2 days before the tragedy on July 30th, 2018, Stephen and Mary Catherine exchanged warm messages, wishing each other a good day. The next day, July 31st, Stephen told his mother that he would not return home to that devil and stayed the night at Thomas's place. On August 1st, 2018, when Stephen didn't come home to sleep, Mary sent him hundreds of messages begging him to return. That evening, she prepared dinner and waited for her beloved. From Stephen's mother, she learned he was at his friend Thomas's place and went to pick him up. She encountered them on the road and, rolling down the window, shouted that she was waiting for him at home for dinner. Stephen replied that he was coming home. The evening, instead of a reconciliatory dinner, ended in tragedy. The police believed the case was closed as a premeditated act driven by Mary Catherine's anger. However, her defense team revealed another side to the young couple's life known to few. On June 17, 2019, almost a year after Stephen's death, his beloved Mary Catherine Higdon stood trial. Before the hearing, Mary Higdon was offered a plea deal for life imprisonment with the possibility of parole if she pleaded guilty. However, she refused the deal, insisting she could never harm Stephen because he was the love of her life. At the initial hearings, Mary Higdon defended herself vehemently, repeatedly claiming it was an accident and that she loved Stephen Freeman. She also surprised many by accusing her boyfriend of abusive behavior towards her, claiming he hit her twice and even forced himself on her on the day of the tragedy, and she had to defend herself. It turned out the couple's relationship had been deteriorating over some time. Friends and relatives claimed Mary Higdon was furious because Stephen often ignored her messages and calls. She demanded attention and pursued him, especially insistently lately. Allegedly, on the night of the incident, when Stephen Freeman finally came home, he refused to eat the dinner Mary had prepared for him, which became the last straw for her. She couldn't hold back and shot at him. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard stated in court that physical evidence supported the claim that Mary Catherine shot Stephen in anger after he didn't come home for dinner and ignored her calls and text messages. The evidence presented included the grease found on the pistol and the sheet taken from the mattress where Stephen lay bleeding. The sheet was shown as a key piece of evidence, indicating that Stephen was not attacking Mary but was sitting still in one spot. Forensic experts examined the blood stains and determined that at the moment of the shot, Stephen was not moving or approaching Mary Catherine, but was calmly sitting on the bed. If he had been moving, the blood would have been everywhere, not just in one corner of the sheet. This only confirmed that the accused's theory was once again false. In court, faced directly with the possibility of life imprisonment, and finally believing in the gravity of the situation, Mary Catherine made the risky decision to provide truthful testimony. With tears in her eyes, in front of the judge and numerous attendees, she once again portrayed Stephen Freeman as a harsh and controlling tyrant and presented specific evidence. She managed to do so, and the defense stuck to the self-defense narrative. They presented the argument that a scandal had erupted between Mary and Stephen on the evening of the tragedy, where Mary fired at him in self-defense. Mary Catherine sorrowfully shared numerous stories from her life where Stephen had hurt her. She confessed he had repeatedly hit her face, shaken her, and threatened punishment for any minor misconduct or disobedience. Living with Stephen, she experienced all kinds of imaginable pressure: verbal insults, physical attacks, and even assault. He constantly controlled and manipulated her, needing to know where she was, who she was with, what she was doing, how she was spending money, and even what she was eating. He drove her to despair with unreasonable jealousy. She never reported him to the police because she loved and feared him. The defense presented ample evidence to support their claims. This included not just text messages taken from Mary's old phone, but also correspondence that raised significant questions about who was the real tyrant and betrayer in this relationship. The text messages, dating back over a year and a half between Mary and Stephen, not only proved Stephen's harsh behavior towards Mary Catherine, but also Mary's infidelity. Some message excerpts showed Stephen insulting Mary Catherine with harsh words and threatening her with repercussions upon his return from fishing. However, The reason for his anger was that, as confirmed by his friends, he was very angry with his girlfriend for being unfaithful, which Mary denied. Mary Catherine shared that Stephen had sexually assaulted her twice, and she feared he would harm her again on August 1st, 2018, leading her to act in self-defense. The defense called an expert witness and close relatives of Mary who could attest to the domestic violence. Mary's sister, Sarah Higdon, testified affirmatively, stating she saw bruises on Mary's arm 2 weeks before the shooting. She expressed regret for not photographing the injuries and believing Mary's explanation that it happened accidentally. A tearful Mary Higdon explained to the jury that on the night of the incident, she decided to break up with Stephen, telling him to leave the house. Stephen became angry and attacked her, and in self-defense, she grabbed the pistol from the nightstand and accidentally fired. After Mary Catherine's emotional testimony, the prosecution and defense engaged in a fierce battle with Stephen's former friends who had been close to Mary for years, desperately trying to idealize their deceased friend. Thomas Skinner, Stephen's best friend, described the victim as a loyal and hard-working country boy, while portraying Mary Catherine as an obsessive and possessive girlfriend who constantly controlled and stalked him. He claimed that over the last few years, Mary Catherine and Stephen's relationship had become toxic, with her threatening to end her life whenever Stephen tried to leave her, and on one occasion, pointing a pistol at her head in front of him. Another witness, Stephen's co-worker Alicia Varela, testified that Mary Catherine would obsessively call Stephen throughout the day, even when he was at work. In Mary's supposedly truthful court testimony, where she framed the shooting as self-defense, she omitted a crucial detail that prosecutor Kate Lenhard pointed out. Mary extensively discussed their troubled relationship and how, after years of harmony, it had deteriorated into physical abuse. However, she never mentioned the moment when she pulled the trigger in supposed self-defense. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard remained unconvinced by Mary's account, noting that during cross-examination, Mary never once mentioned any harsh treatment by Stephen. Repeatedly, the prosecutor asked Mary Catherine whether a woman feeling safe at home would pursue her assailant late at night to bring him back. The answer was unsatisfactory, and the prosecutor continued, vividly describing the accidental shooting. Kate Lenhard picked up the pistol and recreated the scene as she envisioned it. According to her theory, Stephen came home, and after hearing Mary out, they argued, and he refused to have dinner. Enraged, Mary scattered the prepared food around the kitchen. Stephen, trying to avoid further conflict, went to the bedroom and sat on the bed, likely waiting for her to calm down. But Mary, ready for confrontation, called out to him twice without receiving a response, walked into the bedroom, and shot him in the neck on the left side. Since he hadn't turned to face her in her closing arguments, Kate Lenhard reminded the jury of the various stories and versions that kept changing at every police interrogation and court hearing. Mary Catherine Higdon spared no details in her emotional testimony about the alleged abuse from Stephen Freeman. But before handing the case over to the jury, Kate Lenhard desperately pleaded to consider this story not as a case of self-defense, but as a case of extreme manipulation. Despite the lost confession recording, the prosecution presented other evidence and counter-arguments. The forensic examination proved that Stephen Freeman was sitting on the bed at the moment of the shooting, hence he couldn't have been attacking Mary Higdon. Mary claimed they kept the gun in the house unloaded, but detectives suspected that the pistol was indeed loaded in advance on the evening of August 1, 2018, when Mary was preparing a rope for Stephen. This was the only explanation for how grease marks not only got on part of the slide but also inside the pistol. Did Mary Catherine really load the pistol in advance? Colleagues, neighbors, family, friends, and acquaintances of Stephen Freeman unanimously testified that he was not prone to aggression. Prosecutors also pointed out that Mary Catherine Higdon changed details of her story at least 10 times since the first interrogation, attributing such changes to fear. Mary Catherine refused a plea deal as she could have been facing the death penalty. The wait for the verdict felt like an eternity to her. After hearing all witnesses and the accused, the case was handed over to the jury. Just 10 minutes later, the jury was ready to announce their decision. However, 2 jurors out of 10 had doubts about some aspects of the prosecution's story. They were concerned that investigators, so eager to charge Mary Catherine with premeditated action, had not fully checked crucial facts. Questions were raised about the lack of a complete investigation into Stephen Freeman's phone, checking his text messages and browsing history. The prosecution simply hadn't done this. Besides Mary's lies, no sufficient evidence was presented against her. The arguments presented by jurors Victor and Chris had an effect. The jury deliberated and returned a unanimous verdict, not guilty. A few hours later, Mary Catherine Higdon was free. After a lengthy deliberation, the 12 jurors concluded the following. The defendant was found not guilty on the first charge of malicious action and not guilty on the second charge of serious action. When the judge acquitted Mary Catherine Higdon on all charges, including intentional action, reckless action, assault with a deadly weapon, and carrying a weapon during the commission of a crime, many people in the courtroom were shocked, watching the person who took her son's life walk out of the courtroom. Jennifer Freeman could barely contain her anger towards the jurors, and everyone who supported Stephen's family was also stunned by such a verdict. After the trial ended in her favor, Mary Catherine returned home to be with her family in Griffin. Since then, she has stayed out of the limelight and is almost absent from social media, likely to avoid undue attention from the media and the public. Her Instagram profile is private, and no further details about her current whereabouts are known. It's assumed that Mary Catherine has moved on from her harrowing past to live a quiet and unnoticeable life. Stephen Freeman's mother dedicated a farewell post to her son on social media. Stephen lived a life filled with love, joy, compassion, and loyalty. Everyone was his friend, and those who enjoyed hunting and fishing with him were his closest. He had a heart of gold and a charming southern smile. Stephen showed his love for you by making you feel like you were the only person in the world, making you laugh until your stomach hurt, always smiling broadly, hugging you, and never leaving your side. These 3 simple words, "I love you," have always inspired me. So who really pulled the trigger in this story? That's a question you must answer for yourself, as all the answers in this story are evident by analyzing and presenting the situation. It's up to everyone to decide whether Mary Catherine is guilty or if it was a tragic accident that cost a young man his life. How much do you agree with the 2 jurors who changed the course of a young woman's life, giving her a second chance? Mary Catherine likely lives a quiet life away from the spotlight now that she has managed to leave her terrible past behind. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michelle Young. Jason Young comes from Brevard, North Carolina, where he was born in 1974. He grew up in an ordinary family. After graduating from high school, he became a student at the prestigious state university in the capital of his native state, the city of Raleigh. And after graduating, got a job as a salesman in a large retail chain. At work, Jason Young proved himself to be a valuable and promising employee who could always be relied on. But friends spoke of him as a man who was windy and fickle in relations with the opposite sex. He was fickle and often changed women, for which he got a reputation as a womanizer, which, however, he himself was even proud of. Michelle Marie Fisher was born in New York in February 1977. She was raised with her younger sibling, Meredith, with whom they were very close from childhood. Their mother, Linda, spent a lot of time with her adored daughters, tried to support them in everything, and contributed to the development of their abilities and talents. Since her school years, Michelle was fond of law and economics, dreaming of linking her life with this very activity. After graduating from school, she applied to several universities at once, and soon received a positive answer from the capital of North Carolina. The girl diligently studied at the Faculty of Economics and Law, receiving a master's degree in this field. After receiving her diploma, Michelle was hired for a high position in one of the leading accounting firms in the state. Yesterday's student was earning well, fully supporting herself and making big plans for the future. She decided to celebrate her 24th birthday at one of the most popular entertainment venues in the city with her close friends and colleagues. They were heartily enjoying themselves when some stranger awkwardly turned around and knocked a glass with a cocktail out of the birthday girl's hands. The guy immediately started apologizing and, to make amends, bought Michelle another cocktail. That young man was Jason Young, and the pretty young Michelle immediately caught his eye. He sat down at her table and started a casual conversation, joked a lot, tried to be witty and interesting, and at the end of the evening asked her out on a date. Michelle also liked the casual acquaintance, so she willingly accepted his invitation, deciding that it was fate itself made her a gift on her birthday. The couple began to communicate, and soon they realized that they had a lot in common. They both studied at the same university. Although Jason got his degree 3 years earlier, supported the same hockey team, and were fans of the same music group. Between young people quickly began a romantic relationship. But to live together, let alone get married, was out of the question at the start of his relationship with Michelle. Jason was still living at his parents' house in Brevard, and he would only visit his girlfriend in Raleigh on weekends or meet with her during work trips to the state capital. During one of these meetings, his sweetheart informed him that she was pregnant. This news was a real shock for both of them because neither of them was ready for the birth of a child. They were focused on their careers, confidently climbing the ladder, and did not plan to start a family yet. Jason said so at once, but after some hesitation, Michelle decided that she would not have an abortion and would keep the baby. Jason took about a month to rethink the situation, after which he moved to Raleigh to be near his pregnant girlfriend. After a few more months, the couple officially legalized their relationship, not out of love or pregnancy, but due to Michelle's lack of health insurance. Childbirth would have cost the couple a considerable amount of money, but marriage gave them the opportunity to avoid such expenses. The couple's daughter, Young, was born in the spring of 2004. She was given the name Cassidy Elizabeth. The newly married mother went headlong into domestic life and family chores, and her mother and younger sister helped her with this. It should be noted that Michelle's family coolly accepted her chosen one. They were wary of Jason, but tried to avoid conflicts. In the same year, they with a child moved to their own large house located in a quiet and landscaped area of the city. Mother Linda, who came to visit her daughter and granddaughter and help with the household, was the first to notice that there was a certain tense atmosphere in this family. Son-in-law Jason was too emotional and could potentially cause a strain right on the spot. But Michelle made every effort to resolve all the argumentative. In public, she behaved like the happiest wife and mother. Only Mother Linda could honestly describe what was truly occurring. An ominous omen occurred when Cassidy was barely 2 years old. Michelle became pregnant again, and she broke the news to her spouse, but he reacted calmly and seemed even happy about it. Soon, the family traveled by car to Brevard to personally inform Jason's parents of the happy news. They came to visit only for the weekend, and on the first day, they celebrated the upcoming addition to their circle of relatives. The next day, leaving their young daughter with her grandparents for a couple of hours, the couple went to a restaurant to celebrate the event together. As the couple was driving home, Jason, who was at the wheel, excessive steering, and the car went off the road and into a ravine. The couple were shaken but sustained only a few abrasions and bruises, and their lives were not in danger. However, Michelle had a miscarriage. Jason, on the other hand, took the news surprisingly calmly. The accident, the loss of a child, and some strange indifference of the husband, all this looked very suspicious. Later, Linda Fisher would call that accident a bad omen that no one paid proper attention to at the time. They had a mutual friend named Michelle Manny, whom they had known since their days at the same university. For some time, they did not see each other. But in the spring of 2006, shortly before the accident, Jason, during a work trip, accidentally met an old acquaintance. He told his wife about it, and together they decided to invite Manny to visit him. The young woman willingly accepted the invitation, but during her visit, she began to complain about her unhappy family life and problems in her relationship with her husband. At the same time, she constantly praised Jason and told his wife how lucky she was. Jason had frequently flirted with various women in the past, but this particular relationship quickly evolved beyond mere flirtation and friendly support. Jason Young and Michelle Manny started calling each other almost daily and secretly meeting up. Jason consistently explained his absences as being due to business trips, and his wife remained unaware of the truth. In the summer of 2006, Michelle informed her husband that she was pregnant again, but this time Jason was not happy at all. The wife did not understand what was happening. She felt that the beloved was away from her, but believed that this was due to the miscarriage that occurred a few months ago. Jason himself all this time was thinking hard about how to get rid of marital bonds with the least loss to himself. In early November, when Michelle was 5 months pregnant, her husband had another business trip. He traveled 300 miles away from home in his own car, but had booked a hotel room about halfway through the trip. That evening, a pregnant Michelle had a long conversation with her best friend on the phone, telling her about problems in the family and mentioning that she had had a big fight with her husband the night before he left. After the conversation, she went upstairs, put her daughter to bed and fell asleep next to her. About 10 in the evening, Jason reached the hotel and, as he claimed to be tired from the road, went straight to bed. In reality, he was scrutinizing all the entrances, exits, and the location of the security cameras, planning how to leave the hotel and then return undetected, preparing an ironclad alibi for what he thought would be the perfect crime. In the early morning hours, Jason called his wife's sister to ask for help. He said he wanted to give his wife a piece of jewelry for their wedding anniversary, but he had accidentally sent a page from an online store to the home fax machine. He worried that Michelle would see his gift and there would be no surprise. Meredith, though she disliked her son-in-law, still agreed to help him. The police chiefs of Wake County received a 911 call at 1:30 p.m. from 5108 Birchleaf Drive, the Enchanted Oaks area, after Meredith Fisher found her sister Michelle lying face down in a pool of blood in her bedroom. Fisher told the 911 dispatcher that she thinks her sister is dead. It looks like there are bloody footprints all over the house, like the little footprints of Michelle's daughter. Michelle Young died from severe injuries, having been struck in the head at least 10 times during a struggle. When Meredith arrived at her sister's house, she entered through a secret door in the garage that only family members knew about, and that was always unlocked. The house was suspiciously quiet, although the landlady's papers, keys, and wallet were in the hallway, indicating that she hadn't gone anywhere. When she went upstairs, Meredith saw that the bedroom door was wide open, but neither her sister nor her niece answered her call. When she walked into the room, she was met with a horrifying sight. Michelle lay on the floor next to the bed with a fractured skull, in a pool of her own blood. Blood was everywhere. On the walls, the furniture, and bloody child-sized footprints were visible next to the body. Sadly, there was nothing that could be done for the pregnant woman, as she had been dead for hours. Her sister quickly called for emergency assistance. Suddenly, she heard rustling under the bed, looked there, and saw little Cassidy, who looked at her incomprehensibly. Cassidy was not hurt, but she was frightened. The girl saw her mother's death and afterwards spent many hours by her body, as evidenced by the marks on the floor as well as the toys she brought to her mother. Later, forensic experts found a huge number of bruises, abrasions, and fractures on the body of the deceased, which spoke of a long and brutal beating. Michelle's teeth were knocked out, and her skull was fractured with a blunt, heavy object. Later, this instrument of crime was never found. A bloody pillow was lying next to the body, and the marks indicated that the victim had been smothered with it. Nothing was stolen from the house, which means that the night visitor had only one goal: murder. In addition, the locks had not been broken, and there were no signs of forced entry, indicating that the perpetrator had a key or knew about the secret door, which again was known only to family members. In such cases, the main suspect is typically the spouse of the deceased, but in this instance, the individual had an apparently flawless alibi. He asserted that he checked into his hotel room and did not depart until the following morning, when he attended a scheduled business meeting. A review of the records confirmed that Jason had used his room keycard in the evening to enter and in the morning to exit. However, a thorough investigation subsequently uncovered a multitude of irregularities and contradictions. For example, a hotel employee discovered early in the morning that the emergency exit was not only open, but also propped up with a cobblestone to prevent the door from slamming shut. When the investigation decided to check the surveillance camera pointed at that door to find out who had done it, it turned out that this very same camera had been deliberately disabled on the night of the crime. Moreover, it stopped recording about half an hour after Jason checked into his room. The weirdness didn't end there. It turned out that during the night, a man who looked like Jason was getting gas at a station between the hotel and the crime scene, but during the night, he was asked to provide identification as per the rules. He refused to do so, paid cash, and without waiting, quickly left the gas station. The attendant at the inquest identified Jason Young, but the man continued to deny everything, insisting that he had slept in his hotel room during the night. Another oddity was that on the day before the tragedy, Jason called Michelle more than 24 times, and closer to morning, he called his mistress 5 more times, with each conversation lasting no more than 15 seconds. This suggests that Jason was probably panicking, and all of these calls were made outside the hotel, where he, in his own words, had been all night. He was also late for a scheduled business meeting with his partners and looked somewhat confused. However, none of this evidence, either individually or all of them together, proved that Jason had indeed massacred his pregnant wife. Years of investigation and a long-awaited verdict. For almost 3 years, Jason lived the life he'd always lived. Moreover, he achieved custody of his young daughter, which was a serious blow to the relatives of his dead wife. By that time, he stopped hiding his relationship with Manny, who was once friends with the murdered Michelle, which only increased suspicion that it was Jason who committed this brutal crime. Jason was arrested only at the end of 2009, but then, despite the large amount of evidence to prove his guilt, the case failed because the jury did not come to a consensus. However, the case was reopened in 2012 when more evidence was collected, and the testimony of witnesses who saw Jason Young that night outside the hotel in different places, in particular, his rather conspicuous white car, was seen parked on the night of the murder, not far from his own house in an unlit lot, was also included in the case. Also included in the case was the testimony of a child psychologist who told of little Cassidy's strange doll play, during which the girl showed how her daddy spanked her mom, and then she would not get up off the floor. Mani took the stand as a witness in court. She confessed that Jason had cheated on his wife with her, but justified it by saying that he was deeply unhappy in his family life, as he told everyone. Another former mistress of the defendant admitted that she was afraid of his outbursts of anger when he lost control and could hit her. After a long trial, Jason Young was finally found guilty of brutally assaulting his pregnant wife. For this crime, he was sent to prison for life with no right to ever be released. In 2014, convicted Jason filed his first appeal, but it was denied. In 2018, he again asked for a review of his case, but a panel of the State Court of Appeals again denied it. Cassidy was virtually orphaned. Her mother was murdered and her father went to prison for the crime. The girl is being raised by her aunt and maternal grandparents. On November 9, 2006, the body of Michelle Young was laid to rest. This marked the end of a chapter in her life. Michelle Young's death caused a lot of commotion and uproar in the community, as the reasons and circumstances leading to her death. Both locals and strangers felt saddened and outraged that a precious life had departed so suddenly. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The shocking case of Valerie Reyes. One day, during a normal highway patrol check, the police officers found a bright red suitcase on the roadside among the trash and dry grass. They thought someone had left it behind by mistake, but their gut feeling told them something was not right. They slowly opened the suitcase and were shocked to see the twisted body of a young woman in an unnatural position. This discovery made the experienced officers realize that the victim had come across the aftermath of a horrible crime. Valerie Reyes, who was 24 years old, experienced a truly horrific death. She was raised in a comfortable suburb close to New York, within a loving family, and was the focal point of attention for her three younger brothers. Valerie had close and trusting bonds with her brothers since their early years. Valerie was known for her cheerful attitude, heartfelt smile, and knack for forming connections with others. It was not unexpected that she always had a large group of friends around her. Her bond with her mother was particularly strong. They confided their deepest secrets in each other and sought advice on everything, much like best pals. Her mother prioritized her daughter's happiness and peace of mind above all else. Valerie had many talents. She was great at drawing, singing, and aspired to be a professional tattoo artist. With her older brother's help, who was already successful in this area, she studied tattoo art diligently. They aimed to open a tattoo parlor together to realize their creative ideas. Valerie also worked part-time in a quaint bookstore where a vibe of knowledge and creativity always lingered. In January of 2018, Valerie's life took an unexpected turn when she encountered Javier Dilva, a charming 26-year-old Venezuelan who had recently relocated to New York on a popular dating platform. Javier shared his compelling narrative of fleeing his crisis-stricken homeland to safeguard his own life, a journey that had led him to abandon his collegiate pursuits. Presently, Javier devoted himself to forging a fresh start in a foreign land by toiling diligently in a restaurant. Valerie empathized with the young man who had found himself ensnared in dire circumstances. As they embarked on a series of dates, romantic sentiments blossomed swiftly between them, propelling their relationship into a tumultuous whirlwind. Despite its intensity, the liaison endured for a mere 3 months. Javier's attitude, with his early mentions of marriage, made Valerie uncomfortable. She realized their relationship was moving too quickly for her liking. Valerie decided to end things with Javier, a choice he found hard to come to terms with. At first, Valerie's family liked Javier because he seemed to care about her well-being and happiness. But when he found out she wanted to break up, he started acting very differently. Javier didn't want to accept that their relationship was over, so he kept trying to get back together with her. He sent her lots of messages, arranged to see her in public, and begged her to give their relationship another chance. In September 2018, Javier contacted Valerie claiming he mistakenly used her bank card for an online transaction and needed to meet urgently to repay her. Valerie suspected Javier had hidden intentions, so she asked a trusted friend for help. That friend intervened and put a stop to Javier bothering her. With the unwanted attention gone, Valerie felt relieved and could go back to her usual routine. She found joy in simple things and had big dreams for the future. She had no idea that the worst was yet to come. On January 24, 2019, a strange incident occurred. Javier wrote to his longtime acquaintance, claiming that he caught Valerie in bed with another man. This message surprised and angered the girl because it couldn't be true. She and Javier had long since parted ways and had not maintained any contact with each other. Moreover, she had not been to his house for many months. Furthermore, during this period, Valerie had just begun dating another guy. Why would Javier make up such bizarre things? January 27th was a joyful day for Valerie. She happily celebrated her father's birthday with her entire family. It seemed that nothing foreshadowed trouble. But the very next evening, after returning home from her shift at the bookstore, she called her mother in a state close to hysteria. She was crying and screaming into the phone, claiming that someone wanted to kill her. Valerie confessed that she had been suffering from severe anxiety for several days and constantly felt someone's malicious presence. The news she heard about the brutal murders of women in their own homes provoked paranoid thoughts in the girl. She no longer felt safe in her apartment. Trying to calm her daughter, the mother asked if she was afraid of anyone specific, but Valerie could not answer. She just kept sobbing into the phone. After a long conversation, Valerie seemed to feel better. They agreed that the next day her mother would definitely come and stay with her daughter until she felt better. Before going to bed, Valerie sent her mother a message saying that she had already calmed down and was going to sleep. She had no idea that these would be her last words to her loved one. The next morning, January 29th, the worried mother was waiting for a call from her daughter, but she remained silent. Attempts to call Valerie's cell phone were futile. After a few rings, the voicemail would turn on. Closer to noon, she decided to go to her daughter's apartment and personally make sure that she was all right. At work, Valerie was also awaited in vain. Usually punctual and diligent, this time Valerie did not show up for her shift and did not notify anyone about her absence. She had never done this before, as she greatly valued her job and the team at the bookstore, where she had already worked for about 2 years. The perplexed manager tried to call Valerie, but to no avail. The phone was turned off. Anxiety rapidly engulfed the entire family. Valerie did not come to the dinner she had been eagerly awaiting and planning just yesterday. Her relatives called her number again and again, but kept encountering a wall of silence. Each time they recalled the recent worrying conversation and felt fear gripping their hearts with its cold fingers. On the morning of January 30th, they went to the police and filed a missing person report for Valerie. The investigators' first suspicion fell on her ex-boyfriend, Javier, whose ill intentions the family immediately informed them about. A thorough search of Valerie's apartment did not yield any significant leads. There were no signs of a struggle or any indication that the girl had been taken by force. The only unusual detail was small blood stains on a pillowcase in the bathroom. But the police assumed that this could be the result of an ordinary cut or nosebleed. The police immediately started looking for the missing girl. They got in touch with her mobile service provider and discovered that Valerie's phone was put on airplane mode on January 28th at around 3 a.m. Ever since then, the phone had not been turned on. However, the most concerning discovery was that someone had accessed Valerie's cloud storage and thoroughly examined all her photos, videos, and messages. It appeared that the intruder was searching for specific information. Another worrying detail was that at 5 a.m. on January 29th, just 2 hours after the phone was turned off, $1,000 was withdrawn from Valerie's bank account. A man was recorded on a surveillance camera driving a black Honda to an ATM, taking money, and then leaving quickly. Valerie was not seen nearby. The car's license plate number led law enforcement to Javier, who was the ex-boyfriend of the missing girl's mother. He became a prime suspect. Although no direct evidence was found linking him to Valerie's disappearance during a search of his house, surveillance footage showed him leaving his home in a black Honda and heading towards his ex-girlfriend's residence on January 28th. Investigators checked Valerie's phone and found no recent calls or messages from Javier. She had not invited him over or arranged to meet, so why was he there at night without warning or invitation? Even more suspicion was aroused by Javier's odd behavior. Immediately after these events, he turned off his phone, making it impossible to track his movements. At 6 a.m., his phone briefly turned on near Harrison, Connecticut. At 7:30, it was detected in Greenwich, and only at 9:43 did Javier return home to Queens. This was confirmed by cameras near his house. He returned wearing different clothes than the previous night and carried a small sports bag that he took into the house, emerging without it a few minutes later. All of this greatly alarmed the detectives. Later, they discovered another detail. The evening before Valerie's disappearance, Javier posted an old photo of them together on Instagram. Why did he do this? The police were making progress in the investigation, and Valerie's relatives and friends were still searching for her. They put up posters, asked people if they had seen her, and checked all the places she usually went. Unfortunately, none of these efforts helped find her. A week passed in anxious anticipation, filled with sleepless nights and exhaustive searches. Then, on February 5th, an unexpected breakthrough occurred. Highway workers noticed a red suitcase on the roadside, sparking their worst suspicions. Upon opening it, they discovered the mutilated body of a young woman. Her hands and feet were tightly bound with rope, her mouth sealed with duct tape, and her clothing torn and dirty. Despite the horrific condition of her body, the deceased was identified as Valerie Rees, who had gone missing the day before. Her parents recognized their beloved daughter. The autopsy revealed chilling details of the murder. Valerie had suffered a severe blow to the head with a blunt object. She was then stuffed into a suitcase while still alive and left to die. The last minutes of Valerie's life, locked in a cramped space, were filled with unbearable pain and despair. She died slowly and agonizingly from lack of oxygen. All the evidence pointed to the involvement of Javier in this brutal murder. Proving his guilt was not easy. The only direct evidence was Valerie's bank card found in his wallet. During the interrogation, he claimed that he found Valerie's card and her ID in a bar by chance. This story sounded implausible and raised even more questions. The investigators presented Javier with all the information they had gathered: video from surveillance cameras, details of his car and phone movements on that fateful night. They assured him that they were aware of his presence at Valerie's house. At this point, he changed his testimony. He admitted that he was very drunk that evening and might have indeed gone to Valerie's place, but he remembered nothing. However, when the detective showed him photos of his ex-girlfriend's mutilated body in the suitcase, Javier could not bear it and burst into tears. He started speaking unclearly and with confusion, attempting to explain himself. He claimed that he visited Valerie at her request that evening. They engaged in sexual activity, although it was rough. At one stage, Valerie fell, hitting her head on the floor, and lost consciousness. Javier insisted that he wanted to help his beloved. He performed artificial respiration and cardiac massage on her, but it was all in vain. Frightened that he might be accused of murder, he tried to hide the traces of the crime. He tied up Valeria, sealed her mouth with duct tape, put her in a suitcase, and took her out of town. He allegedly did all this in a state of passion, not realizing what he was doing. When the investigators asked him why he tied up and gagged an already motionless, possibly dead girl, Javier could not answer. Then an utterly incredible story began. He claimed that he deliberately used Valerie's card to get into the police's field of vision as quickly as possible. In his opinion, this should have facilitated the investigation. Then Javier spent another $4,350 from the victim's account. During searches of the suspect's home, Valerie's phone and laptop, which he had managed to take, were also found. Javier tried to destroy them by throwing them into the river, but then for some reason returned and retrieved the items. Javier gained access to Valerie's cloud storage thanks to her fingerprint, which he took from the already dead girl. This allowed him to enter the application that shows the balance of her bank card. For the investigators, this whole story sounded extremely unconvincing and confusing. There were too many inconsistencies and accidental coincidences in it. They immediately suspected Javier of the intentional, planned murder of Valerie and provided strong evidence of his guilt. Javier's testimony finally fell apart after the results of a thorough examination of the deceased body. There were signs of struggle and violence on her. Under her nails, the skin and blood of the killer were found. His fingerprints were found on her neck and chest. Javier's DNA was everywhere, on the suitcase, in the car's interior, and on the victim's belongings. It became clear that he had thoughtfully and consistently committed this terrible crime. The suspect was immediately arrested and officially charged with the brutal murder of Valerie Reyes. Under the pressure of irrefutable evidence, Javier da Silva eventually fully admitted his guilt in court. On February 5, 2020, a hearing was held in the case of the intentional murder of 24-year-old Valerie Reyes. In his speech, the prosecutor drew the jurors' attention to the defendant's planned, consistent actions, to how he monitored the victim's every move, obsessively stalked her, and then brutally dealt with her. During the court session, Javier had to listen to many angry accusations from Valerie's grief-stricken loved ones. Her mother's speech was especially emotional. She could not hold back her tears and barely spoke through her sobs. The woman called her daughter's killer a real monster, selfish, soulless, and cruel. Javier's lawyers tried to justify his actions as a sudden outburst of anger and jealousy. They talked about the defendant's difficult childhood, his depressive state after breaking up with Valeria, and his use of drugs shortly before the tragedy. They claimed that all this affected his emotional state and pushed him to the fatal decision. They even read out a few letters from former friends from Venezuela who characterized Javier as a sensitive and decent guy who simply stumbled in life. But these attempts had no influence on the opinion of the jurors. On September 3, 2021, the court passed a sentence of 30 years in prison for 28-year-old Javier da Silva. This effectively meant most of his life behind bars. The investigation also found out that the defendant was illegally staying in the United States. He had arrived in the country back on May 8, 2017, under the visa waiver program, but the allowed 90-day period of stay expired on August 5th of the same year. Javier ignored this requirement and continued to remain in the States, contrary to the law. So after serving his 30-year sentence, he will be immediately deported to his homeland, Venezuela, and there most likely another trial awaits him. The death of Valerie Reyes came as a real shock to her loved ones. They had no idea that an ordinary acquaintance on social networks could lead to such a terrible tragedy. This high-profile case made many people think about the dangers of virtual relationships and the threats lurking in the real world. Valerie will forever remain in the memory of her loved ones as a bright, cheerful, and devoted girl whose life was cut short too early and cruelly. I hope this story left no one indifferent. The case of Kelsey Turner, how a Playboy model and single mother became a convicted criminal. Boundless greed, selfishness, and the pursuit of easy wealth often drive people to commit horrific acts and crimes. The story of Kelsey Turner, a former American model who appeared in popular men's magazines like Maxim and Playboy, serves as a stark example of this. The crime she committed with several accomplices shocked the public with its brutality, ruthlessness, and lack of logic. The young woman who aspired to a life of beauty, carefree ease, and affluence not only lost everything she had, but also ended up behind bars. In Turner's case, the most tragic aspect is that the victim of the bloody act orchestrated by the blonde was a well-known and respected psychiatrist, Dr. Thomas Burchard, renowned for his successful long-term practice and numerous scholarly works. He was also known for his boundless generosity. The doctor was involved in charity work, helping sick children and single mothers. His good deeds ultimately cost him his life. All the participants in these events stood trial and are now serving their sentences in correctional facilities. Let's go back a few years to understand how and why the elderly doctor, who dedicated his life to helping others, met his end. The downfall of Kelsey Turner, a model and single mother. Kelsey Nicole Turner, née Ingram, was born on March 5, 1993, in the port city of Norfolk, Virginia. She was the second child of Samantha Ingram, a would-be model and dancer, and Christopher Ingram, a simple laborer. Kelsey grew up alongside her older brother, Colin, Shortly after Kelsey's birth, the family moved to the small industrial town of Jonesboro, Arkansas, where she spent most of her childhood. A few years later, her parents divorced. Her father returned to Virginia and largely lost contact with his former wife and their children. Kelsey grew into a striking beauty with a perfect figure and model looks. School didn't interest her much. She was more into parties with friends, dating, and attending various events. She dreamed of fame, gracing magazine covers, giving interviews, and walking red carpets. However, Kelsey lacked any real talent. Her youth and good looks were her only assets. In high school, she began attending castings, hoping to become a model. Her mother, Samantha, who once aspired to be a model herself, enthusiastically supported her daughter's endeavors. Kelsey managed only a couple of shoots for clothing catalogs. At 18, Kelsey married Jerry Turner. She was already pregnant at their wedding and soon gave birth to a daughter, Beverly. Despite the arrival of their child, the marriage was short-lived, ending in divorce. By the age of 20, having given up on runway modeling, Kelsey decided to pursue a career as a men's magazine model. She created a portfolio with provocative photos and sent them to various publications, soon catching the attention of several men's magazines. Kelsey saw this as the beginning of a dazzling career and her ticket to the glamorous, carefree life she had always dreamed of. For a few years, she regularly received shooting offers. She eagerly gave interviews, attended events, and tried to make valuable connections. However, her career highlights were one-off shoots for Playboy and Maxim, and a photo session, an interview for 110 magazine. She traveled to Los Angeles and Las Vegas for these opportunities. In an interview, Kelsey candidly described herself saying, "I'm a blonde with a busty figure and a slim waist. What more do you need for happiness?" She added that she loved partying, spending time with friends, and living it up because life is short, and it should be lived beautifully and joyfully. Kelsey wasn't overly concerned about the future, frequently changed lovers, and quickly spent any money she earned or received from admirers. At 23, Kelsey became pregnant again and gave birth to a son, Josh. The child's father didn't want to marry her or acknowledge his offspring. As modeling offers dwindled, Kelsey turned to social media to build an audience. She actively managed her accounts, posting revealing photos in swimsuits, lingerie, or barely covering her intimate areas. To be fair, these images were heavily edited, making her resemble a Barbie doll. She also loved to share shots taken in fashionable boutiques, popular nightclubs, and other glamorous spots and entertainment venues. Kelsey's social media profiles created an illusion of a wealthy, successful, and carefree life. It seemed the beauty had everything and was simply enjoying life to the fullest. In reality, the single mother of 2 small children was struggling to make ends meet, but never learned to manage her finances wisely, spending any money she received on the very day she got it. Around 2016, Kelsey faced serious issues after an unfortunate incident involving her daughter. The girl was physically unharmed, but severely traumatized and became withdrawn and mute. Therapy was recommended, along with sessions with renowned child psychiatrist Dr. Thomas Burchard, who practiced in Monterey, California. This fateful encounter led years later to a terrible tragedy. Who was Dr. Thomas Burchard? Dr. Thomas Kirk Burchard was born on February 16, 1948, in Boston, Massachusetts, to a family of a well-known architect and engineer. Later, his family moved to Virginia, where his father taught architecture at Harvard and the Architectural College at the Technological Institute. This is where the future psychiatrist spent his childhood and youth. Choosing not to follow in his father's footsteps, the young Thomas decided to pursue a career in medicine, specifically specializing in child psychology. After graduating from medical school and defending his thesis, he worked as a pediatric psychiatry resident in various renowned hospitals and lectured at colleges across the country. Eventually, Dr. Burchard was employed at a public clinical hospital on the Monterey Peninsula in California, where he worked for over 40 years as an incredibly sought-after pediatric psychiatrist. Dr. Burchard had an impeccable reputation. He easily connected with his young patients and took on even the most challenging and severe cases. He earned his doctorate from the University of California, Berkeley. According to Google Scholar, he had over 300 scientific publications, which were cited almost 40,000 times in total, and his Hirsch Index, a scientific productivity metric, was 81. Moreover, Dr. Thomas was known for being kind, responsive, and incredibly generous. His compassionate nature drove him to help those in need, particularly focusing on his young patients whose parents couldn't afford sessions. He also paid for hospital treatments for sick children from low-income families and assisted single mothers. Dr. Burchard lived for a long time with a woman named Joanie Harper, who is variously described as his assistant and housekeeper, or as his lover and even fiancée. Regardless, she knew him better than anyone else and was the first to notice certain peculiarities in his behavior indicative of early signs of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. The elderly doctor, approaching his 70th birthday, became forgetful, absent-minded, and inattentive. He meticulously tried to hide this from his colleagues, constantly keeping diaries and notebooks where he recorded every detail, especially names, dates, and events, to avoid confusion. He always carried one of these notebooks in his breast pocket, containing his banking details, account numbers, passwords, and card pins. Another notable aspect of Burchard's behavior was that he, already a generous person, became very trusting, and the financial assistance he provided to those in need increased from hundreds to thousands of dollars. Dr. Thomas Burchard, a windfall for Kelsey Turner. When Kelsey first brought her daughter to Dr. Burchard's office, she lamented that she was raising 2 children alone and likely couldn't afford his costly services. To her surprise, the doctor offered to help her child for free, and after the appointment, gave the struggling single mother $300 for her children's needs. The blonde was astonished, but quickly realized that with tearful stories about her challenging life, she could extract more funds from the elderly man. At the next session, Kelsey, having prepared in advance, put on a whole performance, tearfully telling Dr. Burchard about her younger son's illness and lack of funds for expensive medications. This time, she boldly stated a fabricated amount and received it in full. Kelsey couldn't believe her luck. From then on, she regularly concocted tearful stories, extracting increasingly large sums of money from the trusting older man. Naturally, she spent the money not on her children, but on her own entertainment, designer clothes, as well as visits to cosmetologists and plastic surgeons. Unwilling to return to her native Virginia, Kelsey asked Thomas to pay for her rental housing in California, arguing it would be easier to find a job there, and the local climate was better for her children. It didn't take much to persuade the doctor, who simply paid the necessary amount for the apartment Kelsey liked. There were rumors that the odd pair were intimately involved, and this was why the elderly, respected doctor indulged every whim of the striking young blonde. While these rumors might have some basis, the men's magazine model claimed that Thomas had purely paternal feelings towards her and her children and helped selflessly. This was also echoed in court by Joanie Harper, albeit with the caveat that Turner shamelessly exploited the doctor's kindness and his progressing dementia. It's worth noting that in addition to paying for rental housing, bills, and simply handing out large sums of cash for necessities, Thomas also rented a car for the young woman. However, it wasn't a practical family minivan suitable for safely transporting children, but a luxurious Mercedes-Benz convertible. Eventually, Kelsey realized that her modeling career was behind her, her youth was fading, and offers for shoots had ceased entirely. Yet, she didn't consider burdening herself with any other job, living instead on the largesse of her elderly benefactor. Attempts to break free, blackmail, and threats. Over nearly 3 years of this peculiar relationship, Dr. Burchard spent around $500,000 on the blonde and her children. However, Kelsey squandered all the money, undergoing breast augmentation and liposuction in hopes of reigniting her modeling career. She indulged in endless luxuries, while her children were largely neglected amid her non-stop partying. This led to Kelsey's ex-husband successfully gaining sole custody of their daughter through the court, stripping Kelsey of her parental rights. This left her with only her younger son, whose father, as mentioned earlier, had never shown any interest in his child. When Thomas learned about this development, he was furious, not with the girl's ex-husband, but with Kelsey herself. He realized that she was a negligent mother who did not bother to care for her children and spent all the money meant for them on her own needs, entertainment, and outfits. Dr. Burchard decided to have a serious talk with Kelsey, informing her that he would no longer sponsor her lavish and idle lifestyle. In response, Kelsey threatened to spread rumors that the respected child psychiatrist harbored inappropriate intimate interests in his young patients. Of course, this was a falsehood, but any gossip on the matter could severely damage the reputation of the esteemed doctor and academic. Reluctantly, Burchard agreed to Kelsey's terms and continued to transfer money and pay her bills. In early 2019, Kelsey decided to move to Las Vegas with her son to try and revive her modeling career. Naturally, she expected Thomas, whom she continued to blackmail, to finance this venture. The doctor rented a house Kelsey had chosen and transferred the amount of money she requested. After this, Kelsey disappeared for 2 months, giving no sign of her whereabouts. The fateful trip. In late February 2019, Kelsey Turner resurfaced as she was running out of money. She called Thomas, sobbing, and began to tell him about her severe illness, inability to work, and struggle to provide for her son. However, when the doctor refused to help, Kelsey's tone changed abruptly, and she started threatening and blackmailing him again. It's important to note that Judy Earp had long been urging Dr. Burchard to report Kelsey to the police, revealing her blackmail and extortion. Judy also suggested involving Child Protective Services, given that Kelsey, already stripped of her parental rights over her older daughter, was incapable of adequately caring for her young son. In case the matter went to court, Dr. Burchard secured support from his colleagues, who were informed about the situation and promised to back him up. Earlier, Judy even tried to talk to Kelsey herself, hoping to persuade her to leave Thomas alone, but was only met with threats of retaliation. This time, Dr. Burchard decided to go to Las Vegas himself to verify Kelsey's claims, though he already knew the answer. Judy tried to dissuade him from the trip, but the elderly man was adamant. She then urged him to take her or one of his friends along. However, Thomas insisted that it was his personal problem and that he needed to resolve it himself. He embarked on his journey on March 1st, 2019. A body in the trunk amidst the desert. On the morning of March 7th, a group of tourists traveling through Nevada deviated from the main highway onto a dirt road leading to Lake Mead. En route, they spotted a solitary Mercedes-Benz convertible parked in the middle of the desert with its windows up and roof closed. The absence of anyone nearby seemed odd and suspicious. Driven by curiosity, the travelers approached and noticed one of the car windows was shattered. Peering inside, they discovered signs of a struggle, with bloodstains throughout the interior. The tourists immediately reported their grim discovery to the police. Law enforcement officers arrived at the scene around noon, under the scorching sun, and were instantly hit by an unbearable stench of decay. The source was quickly identified when the police opened the trunk. Beneath a pile of items and rags lay the lifeless body of an elderly man, next to him a blood-stained baseball bat. You may have guessed that the body belonged to Dr. Burchard, who had been missing for 5 days by that point. Judy had reported his disappearance on March 2nd when she couldn't reach Thomas at their scheduled time. She instantly feared something terrible had happened and promptly contacted the police, hoping he would be found alive. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The autopsy revealed numerous injuries on the elderly man's body, including abrasions, bruises, and superficial cuts. He had sustained several severe head injuries, likely inflicted with the baseball bat found beside him in the trunk. Part of his ear had been severed, and his hands bore numerous cuts, indicating a desperate attempt at defense. Also notable were bruises on his face with a peculiar imprinted pattern. Most horrifyingly, it seemed the man had been placed in the trunk while wounded but still alive, and had slowly suffocated under the intense desert sun. Main suspects and crime scene investigation. Since the car found at the scene was rented in Kelsey Turner's name, she immediately became the primary suspect. Judy provided the police with the address where the blonde lived and where the deceased doctor had headed, as the house was rented in his name. However, upon arrival, the police found no one there. Inside, containers of cleaning agents were scattered everywhere, and the air was still thick with the scent of household chemicals. It was clear that a hasty cleanup had been attempted to erase any evidence of the crime. The house was occupied by Turner, her 4-year-old son, and her new boyfriend, John Logan Kennison, along with 2 neighbors, Diana Pina and Jeremy Esherick. All had fled, making them suspects, as the petite blonde couldn't have inflicted such injuries on the doctor or placed his body in the car trunk by herself. The only person police managed to interview was Jeremy. He and his girlfriend, who had been visiting him, left the house while the doctor was still alive and unharmed. Jeremy recounted that his girlfriend had drunk too much and flirted with the doctor, attempting to get a couple of $100, mimicking Kelsey's tactics. Kelsey became enraged, accusing the woman of trying to steal Thomas from her. The 2 women almost fought, and Jeremy had to quickly take his girlfriend away from the house. He hadn't returned for several days and was unaware of the subsequent events. Police also learned from Judy that Dr. Burchard always carried a notebook with bank account details and passwords, which he often forgot. This notebook was missing, and large sums of money were withdrawn from 2 of his accounts on March 3rd. The accounts and cards were immediately blocked, and on March 21st, in Stockton, California, Kelsey and her boyfriend John were arrested after another attempt to withdraw money. For nearly 3 weeks, the couple, along with their child, had been hiding in motels, moving from place to place and paying in cash. They regretted not completely emptying Burchard's accounts initially and decided to do so later, planning to flee to Mexico with the money. However, by the time they tried again, the accounts were blocked, and the police arrived promptly. Reconstructing the timeline of events. While Kelsey and John adamantly denied any wrongdoing, a third participant in the events, Diana, voluntarily surrendered to the police and narrated what transpired on the night of March 2nd. According to her, after Jeremy and his girlfriend left, Turner had a severe altercation with Dr. Burchard, angered by his declaration that he would not give her another cent. She threatened to tarnish his reputation by spreading rumors about the psychiatrist's inappropriate behavior with his young patients. As Kelsey became physically aggressive, the elderly man locked himself in a room. John, with a forceful shoulder thrust, broke down the door and severely struck the older man with a bat, causing a massive hematoma and a nosebleed. Diana rushed in, pleading for everyone to calm down. Seeing Thomas's condition, she urged them to take him to the hospital, fearing the consequences of their actions. After extracting a promise from the doctor that he would tell the police he was attacked and robbed by strangers, all 4 drove to the garage. Burchard was seated in the back of the car. Kelsey then instructed Diana to return to the house and clean up thoroughly, erasing all blood traces. Diana obediently started the cleanup, but soon heard Dr. Burchard's cries and the sounds of a struggle. Rushing back to the garage, she saw the couple brutally assaulting the elderly man, trapped between them in the car, unable to escape or defend himself. It turned out that Kelsey and Kennison never intended to take the man to the hospital. They planned to finish him off using the bat and the small knife, inflicting cuts. John also repeatedly hit the doctor in the face with the handle of his unloaded pistol, causing the peculiar patterned bruises. Diana was again ordered back to the house to continue cleaning. Fearing she might be next if she didn't comply, she left the garage. While she was still cleaning inside, she heard car engines and saw the couple's 2 vehicles leaving. A few hours later, only John's car returned, with Kelsey accompanying him. Diana remained unaware of the convertible's whereabouts until news reports surfaced about a car found in the desert with a body in the trunk. Trial and sentence. From the outset, Diana opted for a plea deal, agreeing to tell everything she knew. This helped her avoid charges of complicity, leading to a lighter sentence for evidence tampering, which resulted in only 3 years of imprisonment. The former lovers, on the other hand, stubbornly shifted the blame onto each other. However, proving their guilt was straightforward, as they left substantial evidence in the car, and their phones were traced to the desert on the night of March 2nd, at the location where they abandoned the car with the body. Kennison was found guilty of second-degree homicide and sentenced to 45 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. The situation with Turner was more complex. Shortly after her arrest, she declared her pregnancy, significantly delaying the trial. During her incarceration, she gave birth to a girl who, along with her son, was placed under the care of social services, as none of Turner's relatives were willing to assume such responsibility. In January 2023, following her attorney's advice, Kelsey admitted her guilt and was sentenced to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole no earlier than after 10 years. She is currently serving her sentence at the Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center in Las Vegas. In conclusion, it's worth noting that in February 2023, ABC's documentary series 20/20th Inches aired an episode titled A Model Murder, detailing the heinous crime committed by Turner and her boyfriend against Dr. Burchard.